What would you do if you suddenly lost everything? Your wealth, your fame, your purpose, vanished in the blink of an eye. Would you still have the strength to rise? Elon Musk had never been one to shy away from challenges. But that day, as he walked the busy streets of downtown Los Angeles, he felt like a man on the edge. He had it all: Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, the future of humanity's reach to the stars. Yet, in that moment, it all felt like a heavy burden, a weight pressing down on his chest. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder of another meeting he didn't want to attend, another decision he had to make, another investor, another deadline. Each call and email piled on the tension. The tech empire he had built was on the brink of something extraordinary, but Elon wasn't sure if he was the one to carry it through. Every success seemed to come with a new set of problems. He was constantly surrounded by people, but somehow, he felt more isolated than ever. It had been a long day, and Elon just needed to escape, if only for a moment. So, he found himself walking aimlessly through the streets, his mind far away from the world around him. He didn't care where he was going. He just needed the silence. That's when he saw him. Sitting at the corner of an alley near a homeless shelter, a man in ragged clothes leaned against a crumbling brick wall. His eyes, strangely sharp, met Elon's gaze as he passed. Elon paused, something about the man's presence unsettling yet intriguing. The man's face was weathered by time and hardship, but his eyes held a quiet strength. "Hey," the man said, his voice raspy but clear. "You're Musk, right?" Elon hesitated. Most people who recognized him would have either bombarded him with questions or ignored him entirely. This man, however, spoke with an air of nonchalance, as if their meeting was just another moment in a long chain of events. "Yeah," Elon replied, unsure of how to react. "I am." The homeless man shifted slightly, pushing a pile of newspapers to the side. "I thought so. You look like the guy who's trying to save the world, but you're also the one who looks like he might need saving himself." Elon froze. His mind immediately went to the constant pressure of running multiple companies, the sleepless nights, the constant fire drills. He had always prided himself on his ability to juggle it all, but what this man said, something about it struck a chord deep within him. "Is that so?" Elon asked, trying to mask the discomfort he felt. "And what would you know about that?" The man smirked, his lips curling into a half-worn smile. "I know more than you think. Sometimes, you gotta lose everything to understand what really matters. It's the losing part that teaches you." Elon didn't know how to respond. Was this some homeless man trying to teach him life lessons? Was he just another person desperate for attention? Yet, something about the man's calm demeanor made him pause. "You know," the man continued, "you've got everything: money, fame, power, but you don't look like you've got peace. You're too busy climbing, trying to reach the stars, but you've forgotten to look around you. The real answers aren't up there. They're down here, right here." Elon stared at him, unsure whether to be offended or intrigued. Who was this man, and why did his words feel so unsettlingly true? He had always been laser-focused on his goals: colonizing Mars, revolutionizing electric cars, making humanity a multiplanetary species. But, as the man had said, in all of that hustle, had he lost sight of the things that really mattered? Before he could process the thought, the man stood up slowly, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. "Anyway," he muttered, "you should go back to your world, do your thing. But remember this: everything you've got, everything you've built, it's only as strong as the people who believe in you." Elon watched as the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. He stood there for a moment, the strange encounter lingering in his mind. What had just happened? Who was that man? And, more importantly, why did his words keep echoing in Elon's mind? As Elon continued his walk, he couldn't shake the feeling that this brief exchange had shifted something deep inside him. A man with nothing had just told him something he hadn't heard from anyone else in years. A truth that was both uncomfortable and liberating. It was as if the universe had sent this man into his life for a reason. But what was that reason? Elon didn't know yet, but he had a feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet understand. What would you do if you lost everything and encountered a stranger who changed your life forever? Share your thoughts below. Samuel's story wasn't one Elon expected to hear that day. The man who had stopped him on the street, the homeless figure who had seemed so distant from the world Elon knew, carried a past far more complex than anyone could have imagined. Samuel hadn't always been a man of the streets. In fact, he had once been a successful entrepreneur, a visionary in his own right. He'd started a tech company back in the early 2000s, long before Elon's name became synonymous with innovation. Samuel had built his business from the ground up, much like Elon had done with his own ventures. His company was thriving, his wealth growing, and his reputation expanding. But life, as it often does, had different plans. Years ago, Samuel had lost his wife to a tragic accident. The suddenness of her death shattered his world. The grief was overwhelming, a dark cloud that followed him everywhere. But it wasn't just the emotional loss that hit him hardest. It was the business collapse that followed. His company had been relying heavily on one key contract with a government entity that unexpectedly fell through. Without warning, his empire crumbled. Investors pulled out. Suppliers backed away. And with no safety net, Samuel found himself drowning. It wasn't just a financial fall. It was personal. In the wake of his wife's death and the failure of his business, Samuel withdrew from the world. He shut everyone out, losing touch with old friends, severing business ties. The once proud entrepreneur turned to alcohol to numb the pain, and when that didn't work, he turned to something more destructive: isolation. Eventually, the weight of it all forced him onto the streets. No more mansion, no more office, no more meetings with high-powered executives. Just a man in the pavement trying to figure out how he ended up here. But as much as the streets had taken from him, they had also given him something unexpected: perspective. Being homeless didn't just make him invisible to the world. It allowed him to see things that most people couldn't. He'd come to understand the fragility of life, how easily everything could change, how quickly the bright lights of success could flicker and die. And it was this wisdom, this hard-earned understanding of life's deeper currents, that had prompted him to speak to Elon. Samuel didn't know Elon's full story. He didn't care about his billions or his Mars dreams. All he saw was a man walking through life like a hamster in a wheel, racing towards something he could never catch, constantly running but never feeling the wind. And in that moment, Samuel had said what Elon needed to hear. As the days passed, Elon found himself thinking more and more about Samuel's words. It wasn't just the advice itself, it was the man who gave it. Samuel had nothing, but somehow, he seemed more at peace than anyone Elon had ever met. More grounded, more alive, in a way, than the people Elon worked with every day. Elon couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing. He had spent his entire life striving for success, but had it all really been worth it? Was he chasing the wrong thing? Was Samuel right? Was he so focused on the stars that he had forgotten how to live on Earth? The next few days were a blur for Elon. Meetings, emails, calls, it all felt like noise in the background of a life he wasn't sure he understood anymore. He felt disconnected, restless. The weight of his own empire seemed heavier than it had in years. But something else was happening, too. An undeniable curiosity about Samuel. A need to understand how a man who had lost everything could offer such clarity. Then, one afternoon, Elon made a decision. He had to go back to the place where it all began. The corner where Samuel had spoken to him. Maybe he was crazy. Maybe this was just a fleeting thought that would disappear once he returned to his high-tech world. But the truth was, he didn't care. Something inside him told him he needed to know more about this man. He drove through the city, his car cutting through traffic, his mind racing. What was it about Samuel that drew him in? What was the secret behind the wisdom of someone who had so little? When Elon arrived, he saw the familiar corner, the homeless shelter across the street, the place where Samuel had been sitting. But the corner was empty now. The spot where Samuel had been just days ago was deserted. Elon stood there for a moment, feeling a strange sense of loss, as if he had come to find something important but had missed it by mere seconds. Maybe Samuel had left for good, or maybe he was just hiding in plain sight, waiting for Elon to come back. He waited for a while, scanning the area, hoping for a sign. anything. But there was nothing. He was about to leave when a voice called out to him from behind. Looking for someone? Elon spun around to see Samuel standing in the alley, a faint smile on his face, as if he had known exactly when Elon would return. I thought I might find you here, Elon said, trying to sound casual but feeling the weight of his own curiosity pressing down on him. Samuel shrugged. I go where the wind takes me. Elon wasn't sure how to respond. He had so many questions, but the words seemed to escape him. Instead, he took a deep breath, feeling both awkward and compelled. I've been thinking about what you said, about losing everything and still being okay. Samuel's smile widened. Yeah, that seems to get under people's skin. You were right, Elon said, surprising himself with the words. I've been so focused on the future, on space and technology, that I've lost touch with, well, everything else. Samuel nodded, as if he had been waiting for Elon to admit it. Sometimes, Elon, you've got to let go of the future to find the present. Elon couldn't explain why, but those words hit him harder than anything he'd ever read in a book or heard in a meeting. For a brief moment, they stood there in silence, two men from completely different worlds, yet somehow connected by the same truth. Life wasn't just about what you had or what you could build. It was about how you lived along the way. As Elon stood on the corner with Samuel, the noise of the bustling city seemed to fade into the background. The chaos of his thoughts quieted, replaced by a strange, unsettling peace. He had always been a man of action, a man who thrived on challenges, who looked to the future with laser focus. But now, standing there with Samuel, a question lingered in his mind. Was all of it worth it? His life had always been about striving, building, conquering. Mars, electric cars, artificial intelligence. He had pushed his companies, his people, and himself beyond limits, convinced that his vision could change the world. But now, in the presence of this homeless man, Elon was forced to face something he hadn't wanted to acknowledge, that his vision might be missing something essential. I used to think success was about getting to the top, Elon said, his voice quieter than usual. But now, I'm not so sure. Maybe it's about something else, something I can't quite put my finger on. Samuel regarded him with a knowing look, as if he had heard this sentiment before. Success is a funny thing, he said, leaning back against the wall. It's always out there, just beyond your reach, like a carrot on a stick. You chase it, thinking it'll fill you up, but once you get there, all you find is more emptiness, because you've been looking in the wrong place. Elon looked at the ground, his mind churning. He knew Samuel's words weren't just random musings. They came from lived experience. There was something raw, something profound in the way Samuel spoke. He had lost everything, his business, his wife, his place in the world. And yet, here he was, still alive, still breathing, still offering his perspective on life. Is that what happened to you? Elon asked, cautiously. You chased success, and it left you empty? Samuel chuckled softly, but there was no bitterness in the sound. I thought I had it all. I was on top of the world, or so I thought. But when you put all your eggs in one basket, when you build your identity around your success, what happens when that basket breaks? Elon didn't answer immediately. He couldn't. The truth stung too much. For years, he had done exactly that, built his identity around his success, around his ambitions. He had wrapped himself in the narrative of being the man who would save humanity, the man who would lead the charge into space, the man who would reshape industries. But now, it felt fragile. What would happen if it all came crashing down? You've got a lot of dreams, Elon, Samuel continued. But dreams are fragile. They can slip away if you're not careful. And when they do, you'll be left wondering what's real and what's just a fantasy you've built to escape from the mess you made of your life. Elon's breath caught in his throat. Samuel wasn't just talking about business. He was talking about life, about how easy it was to get caught up in the story you were telling yourself, to convince yourself that your identity was tied to your work or your achievements. Elon had spent so much of his life looking ahead, working tirelessly towards something that would prove his worth, that he had forgotten to ask himself the most important question. Who am I when all of this is gone? A silence fell between them, the weight of the moment settling in. Samuel didn't rush to fill the quiet. He simply sat there, observing Elon with a calmness that made the young billionaire feel exposed, as if the walls he had so carefully constructed around himself were beginning to crumble. After what felt like an eternity, Elon spoke, his voice softer than before. "What do you think I should do?" Samuel took a deep breath, his eyes scanning the street. "I don't have the answers for you. Hell, I'm still figuring things out myself. But I can tell you this: stop running. Stop chasing the future like it's the only thing that matters. If you keep doing that, you'll never live in the present. You'll always be on the edge, waiting for something that'll never come." Elon felt a jolt, as if something inside him had snapped into place. He had been running for years, toward Mars, toward new technologies, toward a future he thought would bring him peace. But all the while, he had been missing something right in front of him. A sense of connection, of meaning, of purpose that didn't come from his achievements, but from his ability to experience life as it was, imperfect, unpredictable, and beautiful. He felt a strange pull to stay in that moment, to understand Samuel better, to find answers to the questions that had been gnawing at him. But before he could speak, Samuel stood up, brushing the dirt off his pants. "I've said enough," he said, his tone a mix of finality and wisdom. "You've got your own journey to walk, Elon. Just make sure it's your journey, not the one everyone else wants you to take." Elon watched as Samuel turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. The city continued on around him, but for the first time in a long time, Elon felt like he was standing still. A part of him wanted to run after the man, ask more questions, dig deeper into the wisdom Samuel had offered. But another part of him knew that the answers weren't something Samuel could give him. The answers, he realized, were something he would have to find on his own. As he walked back to his car, Elon's mind was racing. What did it mean to live in the present? What did it mean to stop chasing the future? And most importantly, what did it mean to be truly human? The questions haunted him as he drove back to his office. For the first time in a long while, Elon didn't feel like he had all the answers. But that was okay. Maybe, for now, the not knowing was enough. Elon couldn't stop thinking about Samuel. The conversation replayed in his mind like a broken record. "Stop running." Those words kept echoing through his thoughts, haunting him in moments of silence, and even in the hustle of his usual busy schedule. Everything he had ever done, everything he had worked toward, had been a race for something. Success, recognition, the future. But now he wasn't so sure what he was running toward. Was it worth it? As the days passed, Elon's mind grew restless. The constant meetings, calls, and emails all seemed to blur into one endless stream of noise. But Samuel's message was clear. The future wasn't the answer. The present was. Yet, how could Elon reconcile that with the drive that had fueled his entire life? How could he balance the relentless pursuit of a future that seemed so vital with the grounding of living fully in the now? That Saturday, after another exhausting week, Elon decided to take a break. He had no meetings scheduled, no media events, no calls. Just a day to himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't sure what to do with himself. He found himself standing in his backyard, looking out over the sprawling, minimalist landscape that surrounded his home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the trees, and the breeze was cool and refreshing. Elon took a deep breath and, for a brief moment, just let himself be. No plans, no deadlines, no urgency. It felt strange and a little uncomfortable. His mind, conditioned to think about the next big thing, kept urging him to fill the time. But he fought it, forcing himself to stay in the moment. Just breathe, he thought. He decided to take a walk. Not a walk for exercise or a walk to think about business or anything related to his companies. Just a walk because, for once, he wanted to feel his surroundings. He wanted to take in the sights, the sounds, the very feeling of being alive in that moment. He walked for miles, losing track of time. At first, it was hard. His mind kept drifting back to the pressure of his work, the looming deadlines, the new product launches. But gradually, he allowed his thoughts to slow down. He paid attention to the rustling of the trees, the distant sound of children playing, the birds in the sky. It was all simple, almost mundane. But that was the point. As he walked, a thought struck him. Maybe this is what Samuel meant. Not that he had to abandon his ambitions or stop trying to change the world, but that he had to stop letting those ambitions define him. He had to stop thinking of himself as only Elon Musk, the tech mogul, the CEO, the inventor. Maybe it was time to remember who Elon Musk, the man, really was, independent of the title and the fame. As the evening light faded into twilight, Elon found himself standing at the edge of a small pond. The water was still, reflecting the stars above. It was peaceful. He sat down on a nearby bench, his hands resting on his knees. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to simply be present. As the hours passed, something inside him began to shift. He didn't need to have all the answers. He didn't need to be constantly chasing the next big goal. Maybe this moment, this stillness, was enough. The next morning, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within him. It wasn't a dramatic revelation or a sudden burst of clarity. It was more subtle, a feeling that he could actually choose to live differently, that he didn't need to constantly look toward the future to find meaning. He picked up his phone and texted a few people in his circle, letting them know he was taking a break for a while. He didn't know exactly how long or what it would look like, but he knew it was time for a change. He didn't want to go back to business as usual. He wanted to recenter, reconnect with himself, and, perhaps, reconnect with the world in a way he hadn't before. Later that day, he visited his old office at SpaceX. It had been a while since he'd stepped foot in the building, and there was something grounding about being there, surrounded by the work he had built. But even as he looked at the engineers working on rockets and AI technologies, he realized something important. His companies, the projects, the mission to Mars, none of it would matter if he wasn't present enough to experience it. He had been too consumed with his own drive to make it all happen that he had almost forgotten to enjoy the process. In a rare moment of reflection, he walked through the hallways, stopping by his old desk, which was still filled with papers, diagrams, and notes. He had spent countless hours here, obsessing over every detail of the future. But today, the room felt different. There was a sense of nostalgia, sure, but also a sense of release. Maybe it was time to start building not just for the future, but for the present. He sent a message to his assistant. "I'm taking some time off. I'll check in, but I want you to take charge for a while. Let the teams do what they do best." It was a small step, but it felt like a huge shift. Elon had been so used to being the one in charge, the one making every decision. But in that moment, he realized that true leadership wasn't about control. It was about trust. Trusting others to carry the torch, and trusting himself to step back and find balance. That evening, he sat down at his desk at home, but instead of diving into emails, he opened a blank notebook. He wrote, "What does it mean to be truly present?" It was a question he had no answers for yet, but he was ready to explore it. Samuel's words had planted a seed, and he wasn't sure where it would lead. But for the first time in years, Elon felt ready to walk a different path. A path not defined by the need to achieve, but by the need to live. Elon's decision to take a step back from his usual routine wasn't an easy one. The weight of years spent in relentless pursuit of success, of goals, milestones, and breakthroughs, didn't just disappear overnight. But in the weeks that followed, something unexpected began to happen. The space he had created for himself, the moments of stillness and reflection, started to shift his perspective in subtle yet profound ways. He was no longer living just for the next big thing. For the first time in years, Elon allowed himself to experience the world without the constant pressure to achieve. Instead, he became more attuned to the people around him, to the small moments that made life beautiful. And that, in turn, started to change how he viewed his work and his role in the world. One afternoon, about a month into his time away from the grind, Elon found himself sitting in a small cafe in downtown Los Angeles. The weather was perfect, with the soft hum of the city blending into the background. As he sipped on his coffee, his thoughts turned once again to Samuel, the homeless man who had, in just a few moments of conversation, turned his entire worldview upside down. Elon had tried to track Samuel down a few times since their first meeting. He'd driven by the street corner, hoping to run into him again, but there had been no sign of the man. It was as if Samuel had vanished, disappearing back into the fabric of the city. And yet, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to talk to him again. In the midst of his musings, Elon's phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. Elon, there's an unexpected visitor here at the office. He says he's looking for you. A few minutes later, Elon received another message from the same assistant. He says his name is Samuel. Elon's heart skipped a beat. When Elon arrived at the office, he found Samuel sitting quietly in the lobby. The contrast between the polished, high-tech surroundings of SpaceX's headquarters and Samuel's rough appearance was striking. But what was more striking was the calmness with which Samuel sat there. He wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't demanding attention. He was simply waiting. Samuel? Elon asked, his voice full of surprise. Samuel looked up with a faint smile. I know this isn't where you'd expect to find me, he said, gesturing to the sleek building around them. But I had a feeling you'd be here. Elon stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. He had so many questions. Questions about Samuel, about the wisdom he had shared, about the impact he had already had on his life. But there was something different about the way Samuel carried himself now. The uncertainty that had marked their first meeting was gone, replaced by a quiet assurance. How did you find me? Elon asked, still trying to make sense of the situation. Samuel shrugged, his grin widening. It wasn't that hard. I know a few people who know a few people. I figured if you really wanted to see me again, you'd be here. Elon chuckled, though he was still a bit taken aback by the whole thing. Well, it's good to see you again. What brings you here? I didn't know if you wanted to hear more from me, Samuel said, his tone serious now. But after everything you've been going through, I thought I might offer something else. Maybe you could use a new perspective. Elon nodded slowly, motioning for Samuel to follow him into his office. As they walked through the corridors, Elon found himself reflecting on their first encounter. The man who had been living on the streets, lost and disconnected from the world, now seemed to have an understanding of life that Elon was only beginning to grasp. It was as if Samuel had come to represent everything Elon was trying to figure out for himself. Once they were seated in Elon's office, Samuel spoke again. You're at a crossroads, Elon. I can see it in your eyes. You've been running for so long, trying to save the world. But what if the world isn't what you need to save? What if what you're really searching for is inside yourself? Elon felt the weight of those words. They weren't just philosophical musings. They were a challenge, a call to dig deeper into his own soul. Why do you think I'm at a crossroads? Elon asked. I mean, I get what you're saying, but how do you know that about me? Samuel leaned back in his chair, his eyes locking onto Elon's. Because I've been there. I've had everything, and I've lost everything. The thing is, I've learned that no amount of success or achievement will fill that hole inside. And you, Elon, you've got the potential to do something extraordinary. But the question is, what are you doing it for? Is it for the future? For your legacy? Or is it because you've forgotten how to live in the present? Elon paused, the weight of the question sinking in. He had spent so much of his life focused on building a legacy, on Mars, on electric cars, on artificial intelligence, that he had almost forgotten what it was like to live without the pressure of having to change the world every day. It was as if Samuel's words were the final piece of a puzzle that had been rattling around in Elon's mind for months. Maybe it's time to change the question, Elon said, speaking the thought aloud. Maybe it's not about what I can accomplish or build. Maybe it's about who I become while I'm trying to do all of it. Samuel nodded approvingly. Exactly. The rest will follow. The future will still be there. But don't lose yourself while you're chasing it. That's the real key. Elon leaned forward, suddenly filled with a renewed sense of clarity. He had always been focused on the end game. The next goal, the next project, the next frontier. But now, Samuel was challenging him to slow down and enjoy the journey itself, to be present, to embrace the process, and to learn how to find fulfillment without always needing to achieve something monumental. As Samuel stood up to leave, he placed a hand on Elon's shoulder. I don't know what your future holds, Elon, he said, his voice gentle, but I do know this, you're on the right path. You've just got to trust yourself and trust the present. Everything else will fall into place. Elon watched Samuel leave, his mind buzzing with new possibilities. For the first time in a long time, He wasn't looking at the horizon, planning his next move. Instead, he was seeing the world in front of him, right here, right now. And for the first time, he didn't need to rush. Do you ever find yourself focusing so much on the future that you forget to enjoy the present? How do you balance your dreams with being present in the moment? Share your experiences below. The days after Samuel's visit felt different. Elon couldn't put his finger on it exactly, but something inside him had shifted. The frenetic, always-on energy that had once been his defining characteristic now felt out of place, almost unnecessary. He still had his ambitions, still had a vision for the future, but there was a new sense of peace in the way he approached everything. For the first time in years, Elon Musk felt like he was living for more than just the next breakthrough. It wasn't a sudden transformation. There were moments of doubt, moments where the pressure of his company's goals threatened to pull him back into the same cycle of stress and overwork. But something in Samuel's words kept him grounded, reminding him that it wasn't about running toward the future at the cost of losing himself. On a typical Wednesday morning, Elon sat in his office at SpaceX, staring at the huge whiteboard that outlined the company's next big mission, a manned mission to Mars. For years, this had been the goal that drove him, the culmination of everything he believed in, Mars or bust. But now, looking at the board, he felt different. He wasn't less passionate about the mission. He still believed in its importance. But now, he could see it more clearly for what it was. An ambitious goal, yes, but not the meaning of his life. The shift was subtle but powerful. Elon stood up, pacing slowly as he thought about the future. A year ago, he would have been obsessively working on every detail of this mission, pouring all his energy into making sure it happened. But now, he found himself thinking about the people who would go to Mars. The astronauts, the engineers, the families who would be affected by it. How would they live once they got there? What kind of world would they create? That was when he realized something important. It wasn't just about the destination. It was about how they got there. It was about the journey, the way they interacted with each other, the way they handled challenges, the way they cared for the environment, the way they built relationships. He thought back to his conversation with Samuel. Life wasn't about reaching a destination. It was about living fully along the way. Later that afternoon, Elon took an unscheduled walk through the SpaceX campus. He hadn't done this in a while, not since the early days of the company when he would walk around, talking to engineers and soaking in the atmosphere. But today, as he walked between the rocket hangars and testing bays, he felt more present than he had in years. He noticed the workers laughing as they shared stories over lunch. He saw the small acts of kindness between colleagues. A hand on a shoulder, a word of encouragement, a quiet moment of respect. The mission to Mars was still important, but it was the people, the team, that made it meaningful. As he walked, Elon realized that his perspective had fundamentally changed. His vision had always been grand. Save humanity, change the future. But now, that vision included something deeper, something more human. He wasn't just building for the future anymore. He was building for now, for the present. When he returned to his office, his assistant handed him a note. Elon, I know you've been thinking a lot about change lately. There's a small group of us who would like to talk to you about how we can start prioritizing the well-being of our teams. Not just the mission, the people. Elon smiled. He had been expecting something like this. The message had already started to resonate throughout SpaceX. It wasn't just about pushing forward with projects anymore. It was about fostering an environment where people felt seen, heard, and valued, not just as employees, but as human beings. The next few weeks became a turning point, not just for Elon, but for the entire company. Elon called a series of meetings with senior leaders across Tesla, SpaceX, and his other ventures, making it clear that his priorities had shifted. Yes, the missions were important, but so were the people. The employees, the engineers, the astronauts. They were the heart of the journey. He encouraged open discussions about mental health, work-life balance, and how to support each other in the high-pressure environment of innovation. He launched initiatives to ensure that SpaceX's employees were not only pushing the boundaries of space exploration, but were also living fulfilling, healthy lives on Earth. He took a personal stake in the changes, beginning to spend more time with his teams, not as the CEO, but as a colleague and a mentor. His leadership style began to evolve as he learned to listen more and dictate less. He didn't need to have all the answers anymore. One Friday afternoon, while walking through the campus with one of his senior engineers, Elon had an idea. "What if we made part of our Mars mission about mindfulness?" he asked casually, his voice filled with a mix of excitement and curiosity. "What if we train our astronauts not just to survive physically on Mars, but to thrive emotionally and mentally? To help them adapt to life there, not just in terms of technology, but in terms of relationships, mental health, and personal growth?" The engineer paused and then grinned. "I love that idea. It's forward-thinking, Elon, but it's also human." Elon nodded. It was human. That was the point. He thought about how different the world might be if more of the innovations happening on Earth were centered around human well-being, not just technology. What if future innovations could be designed with mental health, emotional intelligence, and personal growth in mind? What if progress wasn't just measured in technical achievements, but also in the depth of human connection? That evening, Elon received an unexpected call. It was from one of his old friends, a renowned philosopher and writer who had always been an outspoken critic of Elon's relentless focus on the future. "Elon, I've been hearing about the changes you've been making," the friend said with a tone of surprise. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm proud of you. It takes real courage to step back and reevaluate everything you've built." Elon smiled at the compliment, but he couldn't deny the weight of it. Courage. Maybe that was what it had taken. Courage to slow down, to listen, and to trust in the present moment. "I don't know what's next, but I do know this," Elon replied. "I'm done chasing a future that leaves me empty. I want to create something that matters now. Something for the people, not just the next frontier." His friend laughed softly. "I think you're on the right path, Elon." As Elon ended the call, he looked out over the SpaceX campus, where the rockets were still being built, where the teams were still pushing toward Mars. But this time, he didn't see the future in the same way. It wasn't just about getting there. It was about how they would get there, and who they would become along the way. A few weeks had passed since Elon had made his decision to shift his focus, prioritizing the present, reevaluating his company's core values, and most importantly, embracing the idea that success wasn't only measured by grand achievements or technological milestones. As he moved forward, he noticed the ripple effect of his changes, not just within himself, but throughout the companies he had built. People were starting to listen. The quiet revolution had begun. On a bright Monday morning, Elon sat in a conference room at Tesla, meeting with the leadership team to discuss a new initiative he'd been mulling over. They had just wrapped up a discussion about the latest developments in electric vehicle production, but Elon had a different kind of idea in mind this time. "We need to make a change," he said, leaning forward in his seat, his hands clasped together. "I want Tesla, SpaceX, and all our companies to not only be leaders in innovation but leaders in creating an environment where people can thrive, not just professionally, but personally too." A quiet murmur spread around the room as his team exchanged glances. Everyone knew that Elon had always pushed hard for performance and results, often at the cost of long hours and intense pressure. But this was different. There was a sense of conviction in his voice, an urgency behind his words that made them sit up straighter. Elon continued, "I want us to lead by example. Let's make our work culture a model for others to follow. A culture where mental health, emotional well-being, and personal growth are just as important as profits and products." The room was silent. Elon could feel the weight of his words hanging in the air. He knew it was a bold request, but it was one he felt passionate about. For too long, his companies, and the tech industry in general, had been obsessed with efficiency and output. The relentless drive for results had often led to burnout, stress, and a lack of work-life balance. But Elon had seen a different path, one where people, not just systems, were prioritized. Finally, one of the senior executives spoke up, her voice tentative but supportive. "Are we talking about implementing mental health programs? More flexible hours?" "Exactly," Elon said, nodding. "I want us to create an environment where people feel safe to talk about their mental health challenges, where they know they don't have to work themselves into the ground to prove their worth. I want our employees to be the best versions of themselves, not just at work, but in life." There was a long pause as the team absorbed the magnitude of the shift. "We're not just building electric cars, rockets, or artificial intelligence, Elon continued. We're building people, and if we can help them thrive personally, they'll give us even more in return professionally. Trust me on that. Slowly, the team began to nod, as if they were all coming to the same realization. It wasn't just about pushing harder or working longer hours. It was about creating a company that truly cared for its people, not just in terms of what they could achieve, but in terms of how they lived their lives. A few days later, Elon held a company-wide meeting at Tesla to announce the new initiative. The event was streamed to employees around the world, and as Elon took the stage, he noticed a different energy in the room. There was a sense of anticipation, a collective curiosity. It felt like the beginning of something transformative. He addressed the crowd with the same passion that had carried him through so many years of innovation and risk-taking. But today, his words weren't about rockets or electric cars. They were about people. For a long time, we've focused on being the best at what we do. We've revolutionized transportation, energy, and space exploration, he began. But what I've realized is that true innovation doesn't come just from technology. It comes from people. People who are healthy, happy, and fulfilled. People who are encouraged to grow, not just professionally, but personally. There was a shift in the room, a collective moment of recognition. Elon's words weren't just resonating with the employees. They were feeling the sincerity behind them. This wasn't a marketing strategy or a corporate mandate. This was a reflection of a new philosophy that Elon himself was living by. He continued, I want to see us prioritize work-life balance, mental health support, and a culture of openness and empathy. From here on out, we're going to create an environment where we encourage each other to thrive, not just to meet deadlines or chase goals. The response was immediate. A few employees stood and clapped, while others nodded in agreement. It was a small gesture, but it was clear that the culture of the company was beginning to change. There was a tangible shift, a collective commitment to doing things differently. Elon's decision didn't just affect the companies he led. It had a ripple effect on the industry. Other tech companies started to take notice. Leaders in Silicon Valley, who had long followed the mantra of work hard, play hard, began to question their own work environments. Could they also prioritize mental health? Could they create spaces where employees could balance ambition with well-being? Elon had always been a disruptor, and now he was disrupting the very culture of corporate America. His focus on the people behind the machines was causing others to reconsider their approach to leadership. It wasn't just about products anymore. It was about people-centered innovation. In the months that followed, Tesla implemented a variety of programs to support its employees. Mental health services were expanded, with therapists available to speak with employees at any time. Flexible working hours became the norm. On-site wellness programs were offered, including yoga, meditation sessions, and workshops on stress management. Elon himself made it a priority to spend more time with his teams, whether that meant sitting down for coffee with engineers, joining in on brainstorming sessions, or simply asking how people were doing. He also started promoting the importance of taking time off to recharge, advocating for vacations and downtime as critical components of long-term productivity. But it wasn't just about the policies and the programs. Elon's own transformation was felt throughout the company. His willingness to be vulnerable, to admit that he didn't have all the answers, and to openly prioritize his own mental health became a powerful example for others. He wasn't just asking people to change their behavior. He was modeling it himself. One afternoon, a few months into the initiative, Elon sat at his desk, reflecting on the changes he had started. There was still much to be done, but the foundation had been laid. His companies were thriving, not just in terms of innovation, but in terms of the people who made those innovations possible. He picked up his phone and sent a message to Samuel. Thank you. It was simple, but it carried the weight of everything that had happened. The journey he had started with Samuel's words had led him to a place he hadn't expected, one where he could finally balance ambition with presence, success with well-being. Samuel's message had been the spark, but Elon knew that it was up to him to carry that spark forward. The quiet revolution had begun, and it wasn't just changing the way he led. It was changing the way the world viewed success. It had been 6 months since Elon's decision to change the culture within his companies, and the ripple effect was unmistakable. What had started as an internal shift within Tesla and SpaceX had begun to take root in other corners of the tech industry. Word of Elon's new approach to leadership was spreading, and it wasn't just making waves in Silicon Valley. It was turning heads globally. Employees at Tesla reported a noticeable difference. Job satisfaction was higher, burnout was lower, and there was a renewed sense of loyalty to the company. In fact, many employees who had once felt disconnected from their work now spoke about a sense of purpose. They were no longer just working on electric cars or rockets. They were working on projects that mattered to the world and, more importantly, to their own lives. But it wasn't just the employees who felt the change. Customers were noticing too. One afternoon, Elon walked into the Tesla factory in Fremont, California, where engineers were testing a new model. As he walked through the assembly line, he was greeted by a group of workers who stopped what they were doing to shake his hand. The mood was lighter than it had been before, and people looked genuinely happy to be there. "Mr. Musk, thank you for what you've done," one of the engineers said as he handed Elon a tool. "It's made a difference. It's not just about cars anymore. We feel like we're part of something bigger." Elon smiled, the words hitting him harder than he expected. "You're the ones who make it all happen," he said. "I'm just giving you the space to do what you do best." As he continued his tour of the factory, Elon couldn't help but notice the different energy in the room. There was a palpable sense of pride in the work they were doing. They were part of something bigger than the daily grind. They were changing the world. A few weeks later, Elon received an invitation to speak at a global leadership summit in Davos, Switzerland. It was the kind of event where the world's most influential leaders gathered to discuss issues ranging from climate change to artificial intelligence. Normally, Elon would have viewed such an invitation as just another opportunity to promote his companies. But this time, it felt different. He agreed to speak, but this time, he knew the focus would be less about his business ventures and more about the people behind them. He had a message to share, and it wasn't just for corporate leaders, it was for the world. Standing on the stage at Davos, with the world's top leaders in the audience, Elon felt a sense of responsibility. This wasn't just about a company or a product. It was about something larger, a global shift in how we define success. "Good morning," Elon began, his voice steady as he looked out over the crowd. "Today, I want to talk about something that doesn't get enough attention in our industry: the well-being of the people who drive innovation." The audience listened intently as he continued. "We've spent decades chasing progress at all costs. The faster we move, the more we accomplish. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of the fact that innovation isn't just about technology or the next big thing. It's about the people who make it happen." He paused, letting the words sink in. "What I've learned over the past year is that the most important thing a leader can do is invest in their people. We can't build a sustainable future if we're not taking care of the ones who will create it. Innovation thrives in an environment where people feel supported, seen, and valued." As Elon finished his speech, there was a wave of applause. It wasn't the kind of applause that followed a well-delivered pitch or an impressive announcement. This was something else. It was genuine, a recognition of the shift in thinking he was advocating for. After the speech, Elon was approached by several CEOs from companies both in tech and beyond. Their conversations were no longer focused solely on the latest developments in AI or energy solutions. Instead, they were talking about how to make their own companies better places to work, how to bring the same culture of care and well-being to their teams. One CEO, who had worked in Silicon Valley for decades, pulled Elon aside. "I have to admit, I've always been focused on results. The product, the bottom line. But you've made me rethink everything. We need to start treating our people like our most valuable assets, not just resources to get the job done." Elon smiled, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just about changing his companies anymore. It was about sparking a movement, a global recognition that the future of work had to be about people first. Back in the US, Elon had started working with his leadership teams to formalize the new culture they were building. The People First Initiative, as it was called, was becoming more than just an idea. It was turning into a framework that other companies could follow. It included policies on mental health support, flexible working hours, and leadership programs focused on empathy and emotional intelligence. The initiative spread to Tesla's gigafactories, SpaceX's astronaut teams, and even to their supply chain partners. By now, Elon's personal transformation had rippled out into every aspect of his companies. One evening, a year after he had first changed his leadership approach, Elon sat in his office, reflecting on how far things had come. The growth of his companies had not slowed. In fact, it had accelerated. But now, the way they achieved that growth was different. It wasn't driven solely by an obsession with the next breakthrough. It was driven by the people who believed in the mission and felt valued in their roles. He opened his laptop and read through an email from his assistant. "Elon, I just wanted to let you know that Tesla has been awarded the Best Company to Work For award for the second year in a row. The feedback from employees has been overwhelmingly positive. They feel like they're part of something truly special." A sense of pride swelled in his chest. He had always been driven by ambition, but now he knew that true success came not from accolades or titles, but from the lives impacted by his work. Meanwhile, Samuel, still living in the small apartment in the heart of San Francisco, was watching the news one evening. A segment came on about Elon Musk and his leadership shift. He smiled to himself as he watched the story unfold. He had no idea that his simple conversation with Elon would lead to something so monumental. You never know how your words might change someone's life, Samuel thought, feeling a quiet sense of pride. He may not have been wealthy or influential in the traditional sense, but he had helped change the course of history in his own quiet way. The ripple effect continued, reaching into every corner of the tech world and beyond. What began as a single shift in one man's leadership philosophy was now a movement that reminded everyone that success is not just about what you achieve, but how you treat the people who help you get there. The morning air in Los Angeles was crisp, and the sun was still low, casting long shadows across the city. Elon was on a rare business trip to meet with potential investors for a new initiative that would combine space exploration with sustainable energy projects. As he sat in the back of the sleek Tesla Model S, the familiar hum of the electric engine was soothing. But his mind wasn't focused on the next big investment or how he would navigate the meeting. His thoughts were consumed by the shift he had been experiencing over the past year. What began as a desire to improve the work culture at his companies had turned into something deeper. He was no longer just a tech innovator or a businessman. He had come to see himself as a humanitarian of sorts, a leader who was responsible for something much larger than his own ambitions. It had been a full year since Elon had made the decision to embrace a new leadership style, and the impact of his changes was undeniable. But now, with the success of his companies and the acknowledgement of his new approach, he was starting to wonder if there was something more he could do. Something beyond business, beyond profit, beyond even his own companies. What if, he thought, he could teach empathy on a global scale? Elon's team at Tesla had made significant strides in cultivating the people-first culture, but he realized that while his companies had embraced the idea, the world at large had yet to catch up. He had always been a believer that technology could change the world, but now, he was seeing that the real transformation came from the people using that technology. If people could see each other through the lens of empathy, if everyone in a workplace or even in society could connect with each other on a human level, perhaps the world itself could change. This wasn't just about his companies anymore. This was about society. Elon's thinking wasn't limited to just employees. He was also considering how his personal transformation could extend into other areas of life. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that empathy, the ability to truly understand another person's feelings and experiences, was at the heart of everything. It was the core of leadership, the foundation of effective teamwork, and the key to solving some of the world's biggest problems: climate change, poverty, inequality. It became clear to him. The future of humanity could only be shaped if people could learn to care about one another, if they could see the world through each other's eyes. In the next few weeks, Elon began to formulate an ambitious plan. What if he could combine his love for innovation with his newfound focus on empathy? What if he could create a platform, a global initiative, that would encourage people to engage with each other in a way that fostered understanding and compassion? He reached out to several key individuals who had been integral in his own journey: his leadership team at Tesla, a few thought leaders in the world of mental health and well-being, and even a few influencers who were passionate about social justice and human rights. Together, they began to brainstorm. The result of those discussions was the Empathy Initiative, a global movement aimed at encouraging empathy and understanding in every facet of life. The initiative's goal was simple: to create spaces where people could connect on a deeper, more human level, not just in their personal relationships but in their workplaces, in politics, in education, and beyond. Elon began drafting a proposal that would eventually lead to the creation of a new nonprofit organization focused on building empathy through education, community outreach, and corporate partnerships. The initiative would include online courses, workshops, and public speaking events designed to teach empathy in practical, accessible ways. But it wasn't just about teaching empathy, it was about changing the very framework of society. He envisioned a world where empathy wasn't an afterthought, but a core value in every company, in every government, in every home. As Elon began to spread the word about the initiative, he faced skepticism. The business world, especially the tech industry, had long prided itself on being results-oriented and efficiency-driven. The idea of empathy as a business strategy was, to many, an odd proposition. At first, his colleagues in the industry questioned the practicality of the initiative. One senior executive at SpaceX, a longtime colleague, raised an eyebrow during a board meeting. "Elon, this sounds great in theory, but how do we apply it to the high-pressure world we operate in? How does empathy fit into the race to Mars or the push for full-scale electric vehicle adoption?" Elon smiled at the question. He had anticipated this response, but his own experiences had shown him that empathy was the secret to long-term success in any business or endeavor. Empathy, Elon said, is not about slowing down or avoiding pressure. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe to take risks, to fail, and to succeed. It's about building trust. If you don't have that, all the technology in the world won't matter. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. It's not just about the mission we're on. It's about the people we're leading on that mission. Without empathy, we can't truly innovate. Despite initial doubts, the response from Elon's employees was overwhelmingly positive. They had seen the shift within Tesla and SpaceX and understood what it meant to lead with empathy. Over the next few months, the Empathy Initiative began to gain traction, with several high-profile organizations expressing interest in the program. One of the first major partners was the tech giant Google, who approached Elon with the idea of integrating empathy-based leadership practices into their own corporate culture. They had seen the positive effects of Elon's approach and wanted to implement something similar. This was a major milestone, and it was clear that the movement was gaining momentum. But it wasn't just corporations that were joining the effort. The Empathy Initiative began to collaborate with schools, hospitals, and community organizations. The mission was clear: to teach empathy as a critical skill for success in all areas of life. One day, as Elon sat in his office reviewing the progress of the Empathy Initiative, he received a call from Samuel. It had been a while since they had spoken, but Elon never forgot the man whose words had helped him find a new way of thinking. "Hey, Samuel," Elon said, picking up the phone. "It's been a while. How are you?" "I'm good, Elon. Just wanted to check in and see how things were going with your new initiative. I saw the news and I have to say, I'm impressed." Elon chuckled softly. "It's still early days, but things are moving forward. I think this could be big, Samuel. You've got something important going here, Elon. The world needs more empathy, more understanding, and more leaders who prioritize people. If anyone can pull it off, it's you." The conversation was short, but it was exactly the kind of encouragement Elon needed. It reminded him of why he started this journey in the first place. Empathy was the key to unlocking true progress, in business, in relationships, and in the world. As he hung up the phone, Elon smiled to himself. The ripples were still spreading. And who knew? Maybe, just maybe, the world was ready to embrace empathy as the foundation for the future. Have you ever experienced a moment when empathy changed the course of a situation, either at work or in your personal life? How did it impact the outcome? Let us know in the comments. The days following the announcement of the Empathy Initiative were a whirlwind. Elon's inbox was flooded with emails, many from corporate leaders eager to discuss how they could incorporate empathy into their own organizations. Some were hesitant, unsure how a soft skill like empathy could fit into the fast-paced world of high-tech, high-stakes ventures. Others were inspired, ready to take bold steps toward a more compassionate corporate culture. As he read through the messages, One in particular caught his eye. It was a letter from a young woman named Jessica, a schoolteacher from Detroit, who shared a deeply personal story about her classroom and the challenges her students faced. Dear Mr. Musk, I'm a teacher in Detroit. My students are amazing, but many of them come from difficult backgrounds. Some of them are homeless. Others are in foster care. They are surrounded by so much hardship, and yet they are resilient in ways I can't describe. They want to learn, they want to succeed, but they don't always know how to navigate the world around them. I recently read about the Empathy Initiative, and it struck me. We don't just need technology or money to change things. What we need is empathy. We need to create spaces where these kids feel understood, where they feel safe to take risks and make mistakes without judgment. I've been trying to teach my students empathy, but it's difficult when the world they see is filled with so much pain. I know you're a busy man, but if you ever have time, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how empathy can be introduced into schools like mine. Maybe there's something you can do to help. Thank you for your time. Jessica P. Elon leaned back in his chair, the weight of Jessica's words sinking in. He had always believed in the power of innovation to solve big problems: clean energy, space exploration, AI, but reading Jessica's letter made him realize something. Empathy wasn't just about business. It was about reaching people at the most fundamental level of their humanity, and sometimes that meant reaching children, the next generation. The following week, Elon flew to Detroit to visit Jessica's school. The decision had come impulsively. He wasn't sure why, but something about her letter had resonated with him. Perhaps it was the idea of meeting the young minds who needed empathy the most. When he arrived, the school was modest but well-kept, located in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Jessica greeted him at the door with a warm smile and an outstretched hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, visibly moved. "I can't tell you what this means to my students." As they walked through the hallways, Elon couldn't help but notice the bright faces of the children, faces that seemed to carry the weight of their circumstances but still held hope. They greeted him with excitement, curiosity, and even a little awe. It was clear that, despite the hardships they faced, they still saw the potential for something more. Jessica led Elon to her classroom, where a group of middle school students sat at desks, working quietly. When they saw Elon enter, their eyes widened. "Elon Musk?" one of the boys asked, his voice filled with disbelief. "Yes, it's me," Elon replied with a grin. "But I'm here to talk to all of you, not just to answer questions about rockets and electric cars." The room erupted into laughter, breaking the tension. Elon spent the next hour talking to the students about the importance of believing in themselves, regardless of their circumstances. He spoke about his own struggles, how he'd faced rejection, failure, and doubt on his path to success. But he emphasized one key message: it's not where you start, it's where you go from there. After the class, Jessica took Elon aside. "You've made a huge impact today," she said, "but I want to know what you think. How can we bring this message to more kids like mine?" Elon paused for a moment, thinking about the words that had shaped his own journey, the words that had given him the courage to keep going when everything seemed impossible. "I think the first thing we need to do," he said, "is give them a space where they don't have to be afraid to fail. We need to create environments where they can explore, learn, and grow, without fear of being judged or overlooked. This isn't just about education. It's about making them feel seen." Jessica nodded, her eyes bright with hope. "You're right. We need to build that safe space first." Elon took a deep breath, a new idea forming in his mind. "Let's take this a step further," he said. "I want to partner with schools like yours, create programs that teach kids empathy, not just through lessons, but through action. Let's teach them how to be kind, how to listen, how to truly understand each other. If we can do that, we can change not just their futures, but the future of our society." Over the next several months, Elon began working with Jessica and other educators across the country to implement a pilot program within public schools, the Empathy Curriculum. The program was designed to teach children not only academic subjects, but also the importance of emotional intelligence, compassion, and understanding. The curriculum included workshops, storytelling sessions, and activities designed to encourage students to put themselves in others' shoes. One of the most popular exercises was the Empathy Wall, where students wrote anonymous notes about their struggles, hopes, and dreams. These notes were posted on a wall in the classroom, creating a shared experience that made the students feel connected to one another, despite their differences. The results were immediate and powerful. In schools that implemented the program, students showed increased emotional resilience, better problem-solving skills, and a greater sense of community. Teachers reported that their students were more engaged in their learning, and bullying rates dropped significantly. It was as though a light had been turned on, and for the first time, these children felt seen, heard, and valued. Elon received feedback from educators, parents, and even students themselves. It was clear that this was just the beginning. The initiative wasn't just about teaching empathy in schools. It was about creating a ripple effect that would reach communities, families, and eventually, society at large. One evening, Elon sat in his office, reading through a letter from Jessica. "Dear Elon, I just wanted to update you on how things are going with the empathy curriculum. The kids have been amazing. I can see the changes in them, and more importantly, I can see the changes in their relationships with each other. They are learning how to be kind, how to listen, and how to share their emotions in healthy ways. You've made a bigger difference than you'll ever know. Thank you for believing in these kids, and for giving them the tools they need to succeed in life, not just in school. Warmly, Jessica P." As Elon read the letter, he felt a sense of fulfillment unlike any other. This was his true calling, not just to innovate, but to create a future where empathy and understanding were as important as intellect and efficiency. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not just for the future of his companies, but for the future of the world. Months passed, and the impact of the Empathy Initiative continued to spread across schools, businesses, and communities. Elon Musk was no longer just a figurehead of technological innovation. He had become a catalyst for a societal shift. His relentless pursuit of empathy had begun to take root in ways he hadn't fully imagined. The conversations around corporate culture, leadership, and education were changing. People were beginning to realize that the heart of true progress didn't lie in profits or products. It lay in people. But with success came challenges. As the initiative expanded, Elon's schedule became more hectic. He was attending board meetings, corporate summits, and university lectures. Everywhere, people wanted to hear about how empathy was reshaping the world. Though he believed deeply in the cause, Elon felt increasingly torn. The push to change the world for the better was more demanding than any of his previous ventures, and at times, it felt like it was taking a toll on his personal life. One evening, after an exhausting day of meetings, Elon returned to his private residence, a modern, minimalist home on the outskirts of Palo Alto. He entered the living room, where his assistant, Sarah, greeted him with a brief nod. "Anything urgent?" Elon asked, sinking into the plush armchair. "There's a call from your team at SpaceX," Sarah replied, holding up her phone. "They're pushing for a decision on the Mars mission timelines. But if you're too tired..." Elon waved a hand, signaling he would take the call. "I'm good," he said. He hadn't allowed himself to show vulnerability in front of his team, and tonight would be no different. The conversation with his SpaceX team was as intense as expected. They had hit a few snags with the development of their new Falcon rocket, and there were delays in the testing phases. Elon listened patiently, offering solutions and guidance, but as the conversation wore on, he felt a growing sense of disconnection. It wasn't that the mission to Mars wasn't important, it was. But lately, his heart wasn't in the numbers or the timelines. His heart was in the work he was doing to reshape the way humans connected with each other. The call ended, and Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the quiet walls around him. It wasn't just the business side of things that felt disconnected. He hadn't seen his family in weeks, and his relationships were strained. His children, whom he adored, were growing up fast. The whirlwind of meetings and new projects had consumed him. Elon knew he couldn't continue to split himself between two worlds forever. He had been so focused on changing the world that he had lost sight of the very thing that made him feel alive in the first place: human connection. It was in this quiet, reflective moment that Elon realized something pivotal. He had been working tirelessly to transform others, but he had neglected to transform his own approach to life and relationships. The mission had to include himself, too. He needed to reconnect with the people who mattered most, the ones who had been part of his journey from the beginning, the ones who still believed in him even when the world seemed to demand too much. The next morning, Elon reached out to his ex-wife, Justine, and asked if he could take their children for the weekend. He had been distant lately, and he wanted to make things right. Justine, understanding but a bit guarded, agreed. He then called Kimball, his brother, and invited him over for dinner. Kimball had always been one of his closest confidants, but lately, they hadn't had much time to talk beyond business. The two of them spent hours discussing everything: family, life, values, and the world they wanted to create. Kimball, ever the realist, reminded him that as much as Elon wanted to change the world, he couldn't forget about the people closest to him. "You can't pour from an empty cup," he said, looking at Elon with a knowing expression. That evening, when Elon tucked his children into bed, he realized how much he had missed these simple, intimate moments. They weren't just moments of love, but moments of connection. The kids had grown so much in the time he had been focused on his work, and yet they still ran to him when they needed advice or comfort. For the first time in a long while, Elon felt truly grounded. The world could wait, he thought. It was time for him to be present, not just as a leader or innovator, but as a father, a brother, and a friend. As the weekend came to a close, Elon returned to his office with a renewed sense of clarity. The Empathy Initiative was bigger than he had ever imagined, but he knew that it needed to evolve, just as he had. It wasn't just about creating a business culture centered on empathy, it was about living it. If Elon Musk was to be a true leader in this movement, he needed to lead by example in every area of his life, not just in the workplace. And so, he made a decision. He would take a step back from some of his high-level business commitments and devote more time to connecting with people, his employees, his family, and the individuals who had been impacted by the initiative. He would spend more time in schools, more time listening to community leaders, and more time reflecting on what it meant to live an empathetic life. The following month, Elon made an unexpected announcement. He was stepping down temporarily from the CEO role at both SpaceX and Tesla. He would still be involved in high-level strategy, but he wanted to take a personal sabbatical to focus on the human side of innovation. He was determined to lead the charge in building a world where empathy was as essential as technology, but to do so, he needed to ensure that his heart was fully in it. The reaction was mixed. Some applauded his decision, seeing it as a bold move toward true leadership. Others questioned his motives, wondering whether his time away from his companies would hurt their progress. But Elon had no doubts. This wasn't just about his companies. It was about setting a new precedent for leadership in the world. The response from his employees was overwhelmingly positive. Many had been struggling with the same issues: burnout, disconnection, and a sense of missing the human aspect of their work. Elon's decision to step away showed them that leadership wasn't just about success. It was about people. Elon spent the next few months meeting with educators, social activists, and community leaders. He visited schools in underserved areas, where the impact of the Empathy Initiative was starting to take root. He spent time in hospitals, learning about the struggles of patients and healthcare workers, and he even hosted town hall meetings to discuss ways in which empathy could be built into the fabric of society. The more he immersed himself in these efforts, the more he realized that this was the future, not just of technology, but of humanity itself. True innovation wasn't just about the tools we built. It was about the way we used them to connect with each other, to help each other, and to create a more compassionate world. Elon Musk had always been a man of vision. He could see the future before others could, and he would stop at nothing to make that vision a reality. But now, as he sat at his kitchen table one evening, sipping coffee and looking at his children playing in the yard, he realized something that had been staring him in the face for a long time. The future wasn't just about rockets, artificial intelligence, or electric cars. It was about how humans would connect and evolve together. It was about empathy. But as much as Elon's heart was in this new mission, the question remained: how could he bring real change? How could he make empathy more than just a buzzword in corporate boardrooms or schools? He had made progress, yes. The Empathy Initiative had started to shape new ways of thinking in schools, corporations, and even in his own company cultures. But Elon knew that true transformation wasn't just about spreading a concept. It was about creating systems that made empathy a natural part of every decision, every interaction, and every goal. It was about ensuring that empathy wasn't just a tool for business, it was a way of life. Elon called an emergency meeting with his closest advisors at Tesla, SpaceX, and his newly founded empathy-driven nonprofit, the Compassion Network. The goal was clear. They needed to go beyond the traditional ways of teaching empathy. Instead, they needed to embed it in everything they did, from product development to public policy. They had to create systems and infrastructures that made empathy something tangible, not just an abstract idea. After a few hours of brainstorming, they came up with a concept that Elon felt could be revolutionary: the Empathy Accelerator. The Empathy Accelerator would be a hybrid think tank and incubator designed to take companies, governments, and educational institutions through a rigorous process of embedding empathy into their core operations. It would not be a one-size-fits-all model, but a personalized, data-driven process that identified the specific needs of each organization or community. This wasn't just about empathy training. It was about designing systems that naturally fostered emotional intelligence, understanding, and compassion. For instance, they envisioned creating an online platform where employees in major tech firms could anonymously share personal challenges, both at work and in life. These shared stories would then fuel a company-wide empathy program, where employees could form mentorships or offer support to one another based on the shared experiences. In schools, the accelerator would work with administrators to create curricula that blended cognitive learning with emotional intelligence training. They would bring in community leaders to collaborate on real-world empathy initiatives, whether in healthcare, law enforcement, or urban planning. But how do we make this scalable? Kimball asked, looking at his brother with a raised eyebrow. Kimball had always been the practical one, often pushing Elon to consider the larger picture. Elon leaned forward. We build it into technology. We make empathy measurable, like we do with KPIs in a business. We track progress. We analyze it. And then, we scale the process across industries. Once we can measure it, we can optimize it. Kimball nodded slowly. I see what you mean, but we need to be careful. Empathy is personal, and not everyone is open to being measured or evaluated. We can't lose sight of the human element. Elon smiled. His brother always got to the heart of things. I get it, he said. This isn't about turning empathy into a formula. It's about creating the conditions where people naturally feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to share, and to help. That's the key. The Empathy Accelerator began to take shape quickly. Elon partnered with thought leaders in neuroscience, psychology, and behavioral economics to build a framework for how empathy could be embedded into organizations and communities. They started developing new technologies, like AI-driven tools that could assess the emotional climate of workplaces and schools and help adjust policies based on real-time feedback. But the team also began to push into uncharted territory: policy advocacy. Elon knew that if they wanted real, lasting change, they needed to influence government leaders. Policies on healthcare, criminal justice, education, and workplace regulations needed to reflect the same values of empathy and understanding that the initiative promoted. One of Elon's first big public initiatives for the Empathy Accelerator was a partnership with city officials in Detroit, a city he had grown fond of after his visit to Jessica's school. Elon knew that Detroit, with its history of industrial decline and economic hardship, needed a model of empathetic recovery. Together with local leadership, they would launch a program called Compassionate Communities, designed to rebuild not just infrastructure, but the emotional and social fabric of the city. The program included building more affordable housing, of course, but it also involved creating community centers focused on emotional and mental well-being. It was about providing resources for the people who lived there, offering not only practical assistance, but also teaching them the tools to support each other. Elon also helped push for policies that prioritized emotional intelligence in public schools, teaching kids not just math and science, but how to understand their own feelings and connect with others. The city was eager for change, and Elon could feel the energy shift the moment they launched the first phase of the initiative. But as the Empathy Accelerator grew, so did the challenges. Not everyone embraced Elon's vision, and there were critics who accused him of trying to fix people with a corporate-driven agenda. Some felt that empathy could never truly be measured or forced upon society, that it had to come organically. Elon respected these opinions, but he wasn't deterred. Then came the breakthrough. In late spring, The Empathy Accelerator hosted its first global summit in New York City. It brought together tech CEOs, community leaders, educators, healthcare professionals, and even policymakers. Elon kicked off the summit with a keynote speech, one that would go down in history as a defining moment of his career. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elon began, "we're here today because the world has changed. Our challenges are more complex than ever before. Climate change, poverty, inequality. But we cannot solve these problems with technology alone. We cannot solve them with intellect alone. We need to solve them with empathy. Empathy for those who are struggling. Empathy for those who have been left behind. Empathy for each other." He paused, looking around the room. "I know some of you might think empathy is a soft skill, a nice to have, but not essential to success. But I am here to tell you that empathy is not just important. It is critical. It is the bridge between what is and what could be. And if we don't take this seriously, we are not just failing our companies, our cities, and our countries. We are failing humanity itself." The response was overwhelming. People who had been skeptical about Elon's new direction were now on board. They could feel the sincerity in his words. The summit marked a turning point. It wasn't just another corporate event. It was a movement. Leaders across industries began to take actionable steps, not just to talk about empathy, but to live it in their businesses, their schools, and their communities. For the first time, they were seeing that true leadership came not from dominating industries or launching new technologies, but from leading with heart. The success of the Empathy Accelerator Summit reverberated across industries, governments, and communities worldwide. For the first time in history, empathy wasn't just a personal virtue or a soft skill. It was a pillar of progress, driving innovation, policy, and culture. Elon Musk knew the path ahead was still long and fraught with challenges, but the momentum had shifted. The world was beginning to embrace empathy not just as a concept, but as a movement. But even as the summit marked a triumph, it also underscored the enormity of the task. For every success story, there were still organizations that treated empathy as an afterthought, reducing it to something superficial. The question now was, how could empathy become systemic? How could it scale globally in a way that wasn't merely cosmetic, but transformative? Elon realized that the solution lay in education, a fundamental reimagining of the way the next generation was taught. If the world was to truly change, it needed to start in classrooms, in homes, and in communities where young people were being shaped. Elon's first bold step came in partnership with the United Nations Education Program, UNESCO, which had always advocated for the inclusion of emotional intelligence in curricula worldwide but had struggled to get global buy-in. Together, they launched the Global Empathy Curriculum, a groundbreaking initiative that would integrate empathy training into K-12 education systems worldwide. The curriculum wasn't a typical add-on to an already packed schedule. Instead, it became a core component of the learning experience, taught through real-world projects, role-playing, and cross-cultural exchanges. The idea was to make empathy not just a lesson, but a practice, something students lived every day, both in and outside the classroom. Jessica had long been a supporter of the Empathy Initiative, but now, she found herself on the front lines. As a teacher in Detroit, she was tasked with piloting the new curriculum at her school. When the program was introduced, there was initial skepticism. Her colleagues had seen countless initiatives come and go, most of them focused on standardized testing or rote memorization. But when Jessica saw how engaged her students became with the material, how quickly they adopted empathy-driven problem-solving techniques, she knew this was different. In one exercise, students worked in small groups to design a community garden for a local homeless shelter, using not only their creativity but also their ability to listen and understand the needs of others. The experience was eye-opening for everyone involved. One particular student, Marcus, stood out. A quiet, withdrawn boy who had struggled in school for years, Marcus had always kept to himself. But under the new curriculum, he began to open up, first to his classmates and then to Jessica herself. One day, during a reflection exercise, Marcus shared something that would stay with Jessica forever. "You know, I used to think the world didn't care about me," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But now, I think, maybe I can care about the world. I can change things. I'm not just here to survive. I'm here to make something better." Jessica's eyes welled with tears. This was the heart of what the Empathy Initiative had set out to do, to empower young people to see beyond their own struggles, to recognize the interconnectedness of humanity, and to act on that understanding. The changes weren't limited to Marcus. Students across the school began collaborating in ways they never had before, working on community outreach projects, learning to address social issues with a sense of compassion, and even resolving conflicts using empathetic communication techniques. Back in Silicon Valley, Elon received a flood of reports from the pilot programs around the world, schools, nonprofits, and businesses all integrating the global empathy curriculum into their systems. The results were overwhelmingly positive. Reports indicated improved social cohesion, better conflict resolution, and, most notably, higher rates of emotional well-being among participants. But it wasn't just about the success stories. Elon knew that in order to make a lasting impact, they needed data, hard, quantifiable evidence that empathy-driven systems weren't just nice, but effective. With the help of leading psychologists and data scientists, he spearheaded a global longitudinal study to measure the economic and social benefits of empathy training, looking at metrics such as employee retention, school graduation rates, healthcare outcomes, and even the reduction of crime rates. The results, when they came in, were nothing short of revolutionary. Companies that had adopted empathy as a core principle saw a 15% increase in employee retention and a 20% increase in productivity. Schools that implemented empathy training reported a 25% decrease in bullying and a 30% improvement in academic performance. In cities where empathy-focused policies were introduced, there was a measurable drop in crime and an improvement in community trust. The data didn't lie. Empathy wasn't just a feel-good exercise. It was a force for measurable change. Encouraged by the results, Elon turned his attention to one of the most pressing challenges: scaling the empathy accelerator on a global level. He knew that the initiative couldn't just be a movement within certain industries or countries. It needed to become a global priority. He envisioned a world where empathy wasn't just a personal virtue, but a universal value that informed the way governments, businesses, and individuals made decisions. To achieve this, Elon expanded his efforts to global policy advocacy. He started by speaking at international forums, including the World Economic Forum and the United Nations, where he lobbied for the integration of empathy into global development goals. He argued that without empathy, the world's most pressing issues, climate change, global poverty, migration crises, could never be solved. Empathy was the missing link between technology, governance, and human progress. In one of his most memorable speeches at the United Nations, Elon outlined a vision for a world where empathy became the foundation of international diplomacy. He argued that nations, corporations, and global institutions had to embrace a model of cooperation that transcended traditional political and economic interests. He envisioned a world where countries shared resources and knowledge not out of obligation, but because they cared, because they saw the interconnectedness of all human beings. His words resonated deeply with world leaders. It wasn't a typical tech mogul speech. This was a call to action on a moral, philosophical, and human level. Within a year, Elon's vision began to take shape. The global empathy curriculum became a central tenet of the UN's Sustainable Development Programs. Countries began to adopt empathy-based policies in education, healthcare, and justice systems. Corporations like Google, Microsoft, and Amazon restructured their internal cultures to prioritize emotional intelligence. The Global Empathy Index, a tool developed by Elon's team, began to track the empathy progress of governments, businesses, and organizations, encouraging a worldwide shift toward compassionate systems. But despite these advances, Elon knew that the real work was still ahead. Empathy wasn't just a goal. It was a lifelong journey. The challenges were still enormous. Systemic inequalities, entrenched political ideologies, and the ever-growing gap between the wealthy and the poor. But Elon no longer felt the weight of these obstacles as burdens. Instead, they were opportunities to help people see the world with new eyes, to make decisions that didn't just serve the few, but the many. And for the first time in his life, Elon realized that he had found the true measure of success, not in the rockets, the cars, or the companies, but in the hearts and minds of people. How do you think empathy can reshape the world's biggest challenges, such as poverty, climate change, and inequality? What steps do you think individuals and organizations can take to build a more empathetic world? Share your ideas with us. Elon Musk sat back in his chair, staring out of his office window. He was looking at the Silicon Valley skyline, but his mind was 1,000 miles away. The global empathy curriculum was taking root worldwide, and the data was rolling in. Positive, transformative data, but Elon felt a subtle tension gnawing at him. They had accomplished so much, yet the journey felt far from over. In fact, it had just begun. How do you change the world when the world is too big for one man to move alone? It was a question Elon had asked himself many times before, but now it felt more urgent than ever. Empathy was no longer just an abstract concept. It had evolved into a movement, a social force that was beginning to reshape industries, communities, and even global policy. Yet, there were still vast areas of the world where the principles of empathy were either ignored or misunderstood. And no matter how many summits, studies, and policies he put into place, real change could only come if the momentum spread beyond the top-down efforts he'd started. He needed to create something that would spark a revolution. Not a political or technological revolution, but a revolution of the heart. He needed to empower ordinary people to carry the torch for empathy, to make it a part of their everyday lives. That was when the idea hit him. What if empathy could be crowdsourced? What if, instead of relying on governments or large corporations to drive change, every person could be a part of the solution? He had seen the incredible power of social media in mobilizing millions of people for causes. But empathy wasn't a cause. It was a way of life, a universal language that anyone, anywhere, could learn and practice. Elon envisioned a global platform called Empathy 360, a social network designed specifically to spread and amplify empathy on a massive scale. But this wouldn't be a typical social media platform. There would be no likes, no followers, no influencer-driven algorithms. Instead, Empathy 360 would focus on real human connection, providing a space for people to share personal stories, offer support, and engage in guided empathy exercises that challenge them to understand others' perspectives. Each user would be able to participate in empathy missions, which could range from simple daily acts of kindness to more structured activities like volunteering or resolving a conflict. Users would not be rated or ranked by how many people liked their posts, but by how many meaningful connections they made. Whether it was offering emotional support to someone in need or helping a neighbor fix a broken fence. The data, of course, would be tracked, but not in a way that measured quantity. Instead, it would focus on quality. How many people felt understood, how many reached out to help someone, and how many communities were strengthened by the platform's activities. Empathy 360 could change everything, Elon thought, his mind racing. If people felt connected on this level, if they could see the world not just as a series of isolated incidents, but as a network of shared human experiences, it could shift the way society operated at its core. He wasn't just building a social network, he was building a global movement of empathy, one that didn't require people to buy into political ideologies or religious beliefs, but simply to connect with others, regardless of their background or circumstances. The next few months were a whirlwind. Elon put together a team of engineers, sociologists, psychologists, and designers who shared his vision. They worked tirelessly to create a platform that was simple to use but revolutionary in its design. The key challenge was creating an interface that didn't encourage the usual distractions of social media, no endless scrolling or competing for attention, but instead provided a space for reflection and connection. Finally, the platform was ready for its pilot launch. They began by rolling out Empathy 360 to a small group of users, targeting specific communities around the world. Jessica's school in Detroit was one of the first to sign on, along with a community in rural India, a group of refugees in Greece, and several corporate teams from companies already involved in the Empathy initiative. The results were immediate and profound. Jessica was one of the first educators to try out the platform. Her students, many of whom had faced trauma and hardship, found themselves on the receiving end of support they had never expected. In one instance, a student named Luis, who had lost his father to violence, began sharing his story on the platform. Within hours, messages of solidarity and compassion flooded in from people all over the world. Stories of loss, grief, and healing. Luis had always been a quiet kid, never fully participating in class discussions. But on Empathy 360, he found a place where his pain wasn't just acknowledged. It was met with understanding. It wasn't just that people empathized with his loss. They connected with it, seeing themselves in his experience. One of his classmates, Maya, who had also faced the loss of a parent, wrote a message to Luis. "I know how hard it is to lose someone you love, but I want you to know that even though we can't bring them back, we can carry their memory forward. You're not alone in this. I'm here with you." It was a simple message, but it meant everything to Luis. And as he saw the positive responses flood in, he began to open up more, not only on Empathy 360, but also in his everyday life. Elsewhere, a group of refugee mothers in Greece found the platform to be a source of support that went beyond their immediate survival needs. They formed a virtual network to share resources, discuss their struggles, and exchange advice on parenting in a foreign country. The platform allowed them to feel seen, not as victims but as resilient people with stories to share, with wisdom to offer. In rural India, farmers used Empathy 360 to collaborate on sustainable farming techniques, but they also began discussing how to better care for each other's mental health, often neglected in their community. The idea of mental wellness was new to many of them, but through their interactions on the platform, they realized that supporting each other emotionally could strengthen their collective well-being. The ripple effect was undeniable. As the platform gained traction, more and more people joined, not because they wanted to be part of the next viral trend, but because they truly believed in the power of empathy to heal and connect. It was a revolution that didn't demand anything except openness, to others, to oneself, and to the possibility of a world where kindness was the currency. Elon's vision was beginning to take shape, but the true test was yet to come. Could Empathy 360 remain authentic as it scaled? Could it maintain its focus on connection rather than consumption, vulnerability rather than competition? For Elon, the answer was simple. It had to, and he was ready to fight for it. As the months passed, Empathy 360 grew rapidly. The platform began to spread beyond its initial communities, Detroit, rural India, Greece, and beyond. Soon, cities across the globe were seeing their own waves of transformation. From corporate boardrooms to local grassroots movements, Empathy 360 was becoming a place where people didn't just connect, they cared. Elon, however, knew the real challenge was ahead. The question was no longer whether people wanted empathy, it was whether they would sustain it. How could they ensure that the spark of empathy, once ignited, didn't fizzle out in the face of the everyday grind? How could they avoid the patterns of tokenism that so often marred other social movements? The answer was rooted in something deeper than just the mechanics of a platform. It was about culture, creating a global culture where empathy wasn't something you practiced because you had to, but because you genuinely wanted to. A world where empathy was as integral to life as breathing. Elon had long believed that technology, at its best, could amplify the good in people. The problem was that too many platforms, designed for entertainment or social validation, had instead fed into the darker sides of human nature: greed, anger, jealousy, and division. But Empathy 360 was different. It was designed to shift the focus, to highlight human connection rather than individual achievement. To reinforce this vision, Elon and his team worked tirelessly to integrate new features that made empathy not just a passive activity but an active practice. They introduced empathy badges, not for popularity or influence, but for actions. Acts of kindness, difficult conversations, helping others learn. These badges weren't about collecting points. They were symbols of impact. In a sense, they were the platform's way of tracking genuine emotional labor. But it was the empathy challenges that truly began to captivate people. The challenges encouraged users to step outside of their comfort zones. Some were individual, like sending a heartfelt letter to someone you've hurt or offering to mentor a young person in your community. Others were collective, creating a group project to address homelessness in your city or organizing a virtual storytelling event for people from different cultures to share their experiences. Each challenge was designed not to promote achievement, but to create vulnerability. It was about moving from passive empathy, the kind of empathy that was felt but never acted upon, to active empathy, where people took steps to change the world around them. In Detroit, Jessica's students embraced these challenges with fervor. One day, a group of students decided to tackle the issue of school bullying. They created a peer-to-peer program where students from different cliques, cultures, and backgrounds would come together, not to discuss their differences, but to share stories, stories of hardship, vulnerability, and resilience. Jessica was amazed by how the students, once reluctant to speak out, found the courage to open up to each other. It was as if the program gave them permission to be human. One particularly powerful moment came when Aiden, a popular athlete, shared a story of how his father's addiction had shaped his life. The room was silent as his classmates, many of whom had previously dismissed him as too cool to have struggles, began to understand his pain. This simple act of storytelling was transformative. Aiden no longer had to hide behind his tough exterior, and his peers learned the deep power of listening. But it wasn't just the students who were changed. Jessica, too, began to understand empathy in a way she never had before. As she watched the students break down their walls, she realized that for years, she had been teaching facts, equations, and dates, things that were important, yes, but that she had neglected teaching the one thing that truly bound people together: empathy. As the challenges took root, the world began to shift. In cities like Paris, Johannesburg, Tokyo, and Mexico City, communities started using Empathy 360 to foster understanding. People from different cultures, races, and socio-economic backgrounds participated in Global Empathy Days, where people would leave their digital personas behind and come together to learn each other's stories. These stories didn't fit into neat, socially accepted narratives. Instead, they were messy and complex, human in every sense. However, not everyone was thrilled about the rise of empathy. Back in Silicon Valley, there were voices, especially from powerful tech moguls and certain political figures, who questioned the long-term viability of a platform that didn't focus on profits, market share, or engagement. To them, the success of Empathy 360 was a fluke, a nice idea, but one that couldn't compete in the ruthless world of business. They argued that empathy was a soft skill, too squishy to be applied to the hard, cold mechanics of the global economy. Elon took their criticism in stride. He had learned long ago that when you're truly pushing the boundaries of what's possible, resistance is inevitable. But he knew that he had something powerful on his side: the people. One evening, at a high-level investor meeting in New York, Elon was confronted by one of his old colleagues, Derek, a billionaire venture capitalist who had helped fund many of his early ventures. "Elon, I get it," Derek said, his tone dismissive. "Empathy is nice, but it doesn't move the needle. What's the ROI on Empathy 360? Where's the profit? Where's the growth?" Elon took a deep breath before responding. "Derek, what if I told you that empathy is the greatest investment we can make? What if we can create a world where people don't just work to survive, they work to make the world better because they actually care about each other?" Derek scoffed. "That sounds like idealism, Elon. You can't run a company on idealism." Elon paused, then smiled. "Actually, I think you can." The conversation left him feeling unsettled, but more determined than ever. He knew that the global empathy movement needed to be more than just a social platform. It needed to become a way of life, something that could transform entire industries, reshape politics, and heal fractured societies. To make this happen, Elon doubled down on one of his boldest plans yet: the Empathy Challenge 2025. He proposed a global challenge to businesses, governments, and individuals to spend 1 year putting empathy at the core of everything they did. 1 year of prioritizing emotional intelligence, compassion, and human-centered decision-making. The challenge would become the litmus test for global change. The Empathy Challenge 2025 was unveiled with great fanfare. Elon Musk stood at the podium of a global summit, the eyes of thousands of business leaders, social entrepreneurs, and activists fixed on him. On the giant screen behind him, the logo of Empathy 360 glowed with bright colors, followed by the announcement: 1 year, 1 world, 1 mission, to prioritize empathy in every aspect of life. The idea was audacious: to encourage entire industries to focus not just on their bottom line, but on the emotional and psychological well-being of their employees, customers, and communities. It wasn't a marketing gimmick, it was a fundamental shift in how business was done. Elon could see the doubt in the eyes of some in the crowd. How could we measure empathy? They must have been thinking. After all, business had been about profits and growth, not feelings. But Elon wasn't deterred. He knew the time had come to move from rhetoric to action, to prove that empathy wasn't just a moral imperative, it was a business imperative. The Empathy Challenge 2025 wasn't just a call for change. It was a test of the world's commitment to this new reality. Companies, governments, and educational institutions that signed on would commit to changing their policies, their strategies, and their internal cultures. Every decision would have to be measured through the lens of empathy. For example, corporate boards would be required to implement regular emotional intelligence training for their executives. Healthcare systems would evaluate patient care not just by physical recovery rates, but by emotional well-being as well. Governments would prioritize mental health in policy discussions. And schools would integrate empathy exercises into the curriculum, helping young people understand not just how to think, but how to feel. It was a massive undertaking, and it would take years for the ripple effect to reach every corner of society. Jessica, ever the advocate for change, was one of the first to sign up. Her school in Detroit was already integrating empathy into the curriculum, but now it would be official. Every student, teacher, and administrator would be expected to engage in the challenge. But Jessica wanted to go further. She envisioned a citywide program where the entire community, from local businesses to local government, joined the challenge. At the same time, Luis, who had been deeply impacted by the empathy training in his school, found himself at the heart of the initiative. As part of the challenge, he was invited to speak at a national conference on youth mental health, where he shared his story of loss and healing, explaining how the platform had helped him find his voice. Aiden, who had mentored Luis, stood beside him, offering his support. Luis shared with the crowd how, for so long, he had felt like an outsider in his own life. He had thought that success meant being strong, silent, and self-sufficient. But after opening up and sharing his pain, he had realized that real strength came from connection, from understanding and being understood. The speech left the audience in tears. Luis's story had an undeniable power. It wasn't about grand gestures or heroic actions. It was about something as simple and as powerful as sharing one's humanity. And as he finished speaking, something remarkable happened. The audience, moved by his vulnerability, responded not with applause, but with a collective moment of silence, as if acknowledging the rawness of his words. The Empathy Challenge 2025 was spreading like wildfire. In Tokyo, a major technology company launched a new initiative to create empathy-based products, smart devices that were designed to help people connect, not just perform tasks. They held workshops for their employees on how to build empathy into their design processes, asking themselves how their products could help people not just function better but feel better. In Paris, the government introduced a universal basic empathy allowance, where citizens who contributed to their community through empathy-building activities, like mentoring or volunteer work, would receive financial benefits. It was an innovative and controversial step, but it made one thing clear. Empathy had value, real value. And in South Africa, a community-based project designed to help HIV patients reconnect with their families was rapidly gaining traction. The project focused not on medical treatment, but on emotional recovery. The participants were encouraged to talk about their fears, their hopes, and their past experiences. It was a testament to the growing realization that healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional and psychological too. As more and more organizations, governments, and individuals joined the challenge, the global conversation around empathy shifted. People began to see empathy as not just a soft skill, but a key to innovation, to solving some of the world's most entrenched problems. And though there were inevitable setbacks, skepticism, resistance, and the always present specter of corporate greed, the movement began to find its own momentum. One day, Elon received a message from Derek, his old investor, the one who had scoffed at the idea of empathy in business. Elon, the message began, "I've been watching, and you might just be onto something here. I can't tell you how many times I've seen my own employees break down, not because of the workload, but because they feel disconnected. I'm willing to take the plunge. Let's see where this empathy thing really leads." Elon smiled as he read the message. It wasn't just a win for Empathy 360, it was a win for the world. Even the skeptics were starting to see it. Empathy wasn't a side project, it was a catalyst. But as the world's attention began to turn toward the transformative power of empathy, Elon knew they were just scratching the surface. The question was no longer whether empathy was a nice idea. The question was, how could they scale it? How could they ensure that the entire world, from the smallest villages to the biggest cities, could tap into the power of empathy and make it a part of their daily lives? He knew that the real challenge was ahead. The Empathy Challenge 2025 was beginning to ripple through society in ways that no one, not even Elon, had fully anticipated. What started as a global experiment had morphed into a cultural revolution, one that spanned continents, touched industries, and reshaped communities. In cities like New York, London, and Sydney, businesses had started adopting empathy as part of their corporate DNA. CEOs were sitting down with their employees, not just to discuss profits, but to learn about their personal struggles, their joys, and their dreams. It was no longer enough to simply ask, how can I improve the bottom line? Companies were beginning to ask, how can I improve lives? Meanwhile, in rural areas and underdeveloped regions, empathy initiatives were flourishing in ways that were nothing short of miraculous. In villages across East Africa, where access to technology had always been limited, community members used Empathy 360's offline platform to connect, share resources, and build a shared sense of hope. With little access to traditional support networks, people found strength in each other's stories. In South America, where political strife had left many feeling divided and disillusioned, empathy became the bridge that connected people from opposing sides. Political activists, artists, and ordinary citizens used Empathy 360 to hold virtual town halls where they listened to each other's pain, frustrations, and hopes for the future. These conversations didn't always lead to agreement, but they created something far more valuable: understanding. Jessica continued to lead her students in Detroit through their own empathy challenges. What had started as small classroom exercises now spread into the community. Her students, once wary of the world outside their school, began volunteering at local shelters, organizing neighborhood cleanups, and even helping elderly neighbors with basic tasks. For the first time in years, the students of Jessica's school felt like they were part of something bigger than themselves. The violence, the poverty, the uncertainty, they didn't have all the answers, but they had the tools to connect, to heal, and to create change. And then there was Luis, who had been a quiet, introspective teenager just a year ago. The young man who had once seen the world through the lens of pain and isolation was now becoming a leader in the empathy movement. He had not only shared his story with the world, but had now made it his mission to help others do the same. He traveled across the country, speaking at schools, universities, and conferences about the healing power of empathy. He shared the struggles of losing his father and how empathy had allowed him to process his grief, reconnect with his family, and find his voice. Luis had become a living example of what empathy could do when it was practiced, not just theorized. And his message resonated deeply with millions. He reminded people that empathy didn't require perfection. It wasn't about being the perfect person or having all the answers. It was about being willing to listen, to understand, and to act with compassion. But as Empathy 360 grew, there were new challenges on the horizon. With success came the inevitable pressure to scale even faster. Elon and his team were inundated with requests from governments, corporations, and individuals eager to harness the power of empathy in their own organizations and communities. The next phase of Empathy 360 would require more than just the basics. It would need to move beyond just social interaction. It needed to be deeply embedded into the fabric of society. Governments would need to enact policies that nurtured empathy at the institutional level. Corporations would need to fundamentally rethink their purpose, beyond just making money, to creating real value for people's emotional and psychological well-being. It would also require new forms of leadership, leaders who understood that empathy was not a sign of weakness, but a sign of strength. Leaders who could make decisions based on the understanding that people mattered more than profits. One evening, as Elon was reflecting on how far they had come, he sat in a meeting with some of the top economists and political leaders who had supported the launch of the Empathy Challenge 2025. They had just come back from a global summit in Geneva, where representatives from dozens of countries had gathered to discuss the impact of empathy on global policy. As they pored over data and reports, one of the leaders, Amara, a government minister from India, spoke up. "Elon, this is more than just a trend. This is a movement. She paused and then added, "We are witnessing a global awakening." It was a powerful phrase, and one that resonated with Elon. It was true. The world was changing, and it wasn't because of any one company or product or political ideology. It was because of a collective decision by people all over the world to care about each other in a way that hadn't been done before. And that was why Empathy 360 was succeeding. It wasn't just a tool, it was a collective consciousness. Back in Detroit, Jessica received a message from Aiden. He had just graduated high school and was planning to attend college in New York, but he wanted to thank Jessica for everything she had done. He wrote, "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be calling myself an empathetic person, but I've changed. I've learned how to listen. I've learned how to connect. And most importantly, I've learned how to be present with people, without judgment, without the need to fix them, just to listen and to be there. Thank you for helping me see that." The message hit Jessica harder than she expected. Aiden was one of the students who had initially been skeptical about the empathy curriculum. He had thought it was a waste of time. Until he had experienced it for himself, his transformation was a sign of something far greater. It wasn't just the students who were changing, it was the entire community. As Elon sat back in his chair that night, the weight of what they had started began to settle in. The question was no longer, can we change the world? The question had shifted to, how do we sustain this change? The answer was clear, through each other, through the actions of every individual who made the choice to prioritize empathy in their lives, through the leaders who embraced vulnerability and understanding, and through the generations that would grow up in a world where empathy was woven into the fabric of society. The world was waking up, and it was beautiful. What do you think is the most important change that empathy could bring to the world in the next decade? How can we all contribute to making empathy a core value in our communities? Let's hear your thoughts and ideas. As the Empathy Challenge 2025 entered its second year, it became clear that the movement was no longer something that could be contained within a single platform or group. It had evolved into a global revolution, a force that reshaped everything from business practices to politics, from family dynamics to the fabric of everyday social interactions. The ripple effect was undeniable. Governments across the world began to realize the potential of empathy not only as a tool for healing, but as a means of building resilient economies. In Canada, the Prime Minister announced a nationwide initiative called Empathy First, a policy aimed at integrating emotional intelligence into all public services, from healthcare to law enforcement. It was a revolutionary approach, and soon, other nations followed suit, building policies that prioritized mental well-being and emotional support as foundational to progress. But it was in the business world where the true transformation began to take shape. A major breakthrough occurred when Tesla, under Elon's leadership, became the first global corporation to fully integrate empathy into its business model. Elon had always believed that innovation could drive humanity forward, but now he understood that true innovation wasn't just about creating new technology. It was about creating a new world, a world where people came first. At Tesla's headquarters in California, a new initiative called Project Empathy was launched. This project aimed to take empathy beyond employee training or customer service. It was designed to embed empathy into the company's core values, from product development to employee satisfaction to sustainability. The focus was not just on making electric cars or renewable energy solutions, but on creating solutions that worked for human beings at every level. Project Empathy began with something simple: listening. Tesla's leadership held town hall meetings with employees in every department, from engineers to factory workers to sales staff. They asked one simple question: how can we make Tesla not just a company, but a community that thrives on understanding and respect? The answers were as varied as the employees themselves, but the message was the same. They wanted a company that cared about its people, about their lives, their families, and their futures. Elon listened, and for the first time, he didn't just hear feedback, he felt it. Meanwhile, in New York City, Jessica and her students were on the front lines of this change. The school district had become a model for integrating empathy into education, and now other school districts across the U.S. were reaching out to learn how to replicate their success. The students' involvement in empathy challenges had grown beyond the classroom. They were involved in community-wide efforts to combat homelessness, help refugees, and support mental health initiatives. Jessica had even seen a shift in her own teaching. Lessons on algebra or history were no longer isolated subjects. They were now taught in a way that encouraged critical thinking alongside emotional reflection. For example, when studying World War II, students didn't just memorize facts about the war. They engaged in debates, role-playing, and discussions where they imagined the lives of the people who lived through the war, the soldiers, the civilians, the refugees. This emotional approach led to a deeper understanding of history and a stronger empathy for the struggles of others. The results were astonishing. Not only were academic scores improving, but behavioral problems in the classroom were drastically decreasing. Students, who had once acted out in anger or frustration, were learning to understand their emotions, express them more healthily, and connect with their peers in ways they never had before. Luis was a living example of how far the ripple effect of empathy had spread. His work had transcended his community. He had become a spokesperson for the youth movement, traveling the world to speak about the healing power of empathy. His mission was clear: to teach young people that they didn't have to be defined by their pain. They could use that pain as a source of strength to connect with others and make the world a better place. At one of his speaking engagements in Africa, he stood before a crowd of hundreds of young people, many of whom had lost family members to violence, famine, or disease. They were resilient, but they had also been hardened by their circumstances. Luis shared his own story of overcoming grief and loss, and how empathy had been the key to his transformation. "You don't need to be a superhero," he told them. "You just need to be human, to see the pain in others and decide to make a difference. That's what empathy is, showing up for someone, even when you don't have all the answers." The crowd erupted into applause. It wasn't just his words that had struck them. It was the honesty, the vulnerability, and the shared understanding of what it meant to be human. Luis wasn't just talking about empathy, he was living it. Elon, too, was beginning to see the profound effect that Empathy 360 was having on his own life. The more he worked with his team, the more he realized that the power of human connection and the importance of listening was central to all of their successes. One afternoon, as Elon sat in a meeting with some of Tesla's top engineers, the conversation shifted from electric cars to societal change. They were discussing the possibility of creating a new kind of energy grid, one that not only powered homes but also connected communities. Elon asked his team, "How can we design a system that doesn't just power homes, but also brings people together? A grid that's as much about community as it is about energy?" One of the engineers, Laura, spoke up. "What if we could create a system where people could share not just electricity, but resources? Imagine if communities could exchange excess power, food, and even skills in a kind of local barter system, all powered by the same energy grid." It's about creating interconnectedness, not just connectivity. Elon was inspired. It was clear. Empathy wasn't just about understanding people. It was about building systems that supported people. They would not only create the next generation of energy, they would create a next-generation society. As the year went on, it became increasingly clear that the Empathy Challenge 2025 had sparked more than just a shift in individual behavior. It had triggered an entire paradigm shift. People began to see that empathy wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. Elon stood in front of a global audience once more, this time at the United Nations, where he was invited to speak about the role of empathy in addressing global challenges. It wasn't just a corporate speech, it was a call to action. Empathy is not just about making people feel better. It's about making the world better. If we want to solve climate change, end poverty, or achieve global peace, we need to start by understanding each other. We need to listen, not just to words, but to hearts. We need to build systems that serve people, not just profits. We need a world that is connected in every sense of the word. And it all begins with empathy. The applause was deafening. And for the first time, Elon truly understood the scope of the movement he had helped create. Empathy was no longer a concept, it was a global necessity. As the Empathy Challenge 2025 gained momentum, there was an undeniable shift in the global conversation. Empathy was no longer just an idealistic dream. It had become a force that moved entire industries, governments, and communities. But even amidst the success and celebration, there were moments when the weight of the movement began to feel overwhelming. Elon Musk had always been a visionary, But as the global momentum around Empathy 360 surged, he began to feel a growing sense of doubt. Was this truly sustainable? Could a single idea really change the world? Was he the right person to carry this massive responsibility forward? These thoughts gnawed at him late at night, after the meetings, after the speeches, when the applause had faded. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping through his fingers, something essential. One evening, he was sitting alone in his office, staring out at the vast expanse of SpaceX's rocket field. The stars above seemed so far away, a reminder of his long-held dream of sending humanity to Mars. Yet, even as his focus had shifted from space exploration to human connection, he wondered whether he had lost sight of his original mission. What happens when the world gets too comfortable, he wondered. When people stop pushing boundaries, stop questioning, stop striving for something bigger? He felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility, and with it, the nagging fear that perhaps he had bitten off more than he could chew. What if all of this, the movement, the revolution, was just another fleeting trend? What if it faded with time, like so many other ideas before it? At that moment, he called Luis, who had now become a close friend and trusted advisor. Luis had a unique perspective, one shaped by real-world struggles and personal transformation. Elon needed to hear from someone who had lived through the changes they were trying to create, someone who could offer him a sense of clarity. When Luis picked up the phone, Elon didn't immediately speak. He just let out a long, heavy breath. "Hey, Elon, what's going on?" Elon ran a hand through his hair. "I'm starting to wonder if we're in over our heads with all of this. I mean, we've started a movement, sure, but is it enough? Is this going to last? What happens when the initial excitement wears off? What's next?" Luis paused, his voice gentle but steady. "I think you're overthinking it. The thing is, we're not trying to change the world overnight. What we're doing isn't about a quick fix or a flash-in-the-pan trend. It's about creating something that's sustainable, something that becomes part of people's everyday lives. It's about planting seeds. And seeds grow slowly." Elon chuckled, feeling a small weight lift off his shoulders. "Seeds? Yeah, I guess you're right." Luis continued. "Look, the world's never going to be perfect, and change isn't easy. But what you've started with Empathy 360 is more than just a tool or a movement. It's a way of being. It's about learning to connect with others in a way that makes us all stronger. And that's a ripple effect that can't be stopped." There was a silence on the line, but this time it was a comforting one, a shared understanding between two men who had both experienced profound loss, growth, and transformation. Finally, Elon spoke again. "I guess I needed to hear that. Thanks, Luis." Luis smiled on the other end of the line. "Anytime, Elon. We're in this together. And we've only just begun." The conversation with Luis was the turning point Elon needed. The doubt didn't disappear completely, but he realized that the movement was never about perfection. It was about progress. It was about doing the hard work of listening, learning, and growing. And sometimes, the most important part of growth was simply showing up. The next day, Elon returned to his team at Tesla, eager to refocus on what truly mattered. He began brainstorming with his leadership group about how to further integrate empathy into their work, not just for their employees, but for their customers and the world at large. They discussed new ways to involve communities in the company's projects, ways that would go beyond simply selling products. They talked about human-centered design, a philosophy that prioritized emotional well-being in every product Tesla created. It wasn't just about making the best electric car. It was about creating experiences that resonated with people on a deep emotional level. In the midst of these conversations, Elon had a realization. The future of empathy wasn't in forcing people to embrace change. It was in inviting them to experience it in a way that felt authentic. It was about leading by example, showing people that empathy could be a powerful tool for innovation without imposing it on anyone. Meanwhile, in Detroit, Jessica faced her own challenges. The growth of empathy-based learning in her community had been nothing short of extraordinary, but it hadn't come without backlash. There were parents, teachers, and community leaders who still questioned the effectiveness of such an emotionally driven approach to education. One evening, after a particularly heated meeting with a group of skeptical educators, Jessica sat alone in her office, wondering if she was really making a difference. Were the results of empathy-based teaching really sustainable? Could she keep up the momentum in a world that was constantly changing? Just as doubt began to creep in, she received a text message from Aiden, one of her students who had graduated and gone on to study at Columbia University. His message read, "Jessica, I just wanted to say thank you again for everything you did. I've taken your lessons on empathy with me everywhere I go. The way you taught me to listen, to connect, it's helped me more than I can say. I'm getting A's in my classes, but it's the emotional growth that's had the real impact. I don't know if I'd be here without you." Jessica read the message again, letting it sink in. Aiden's success wasn't just academic, it was personal. And that was the heart of the change they were trying to create. This wasn't about grades, about approval, or about proving anything to the world. It was about people, about relationships. As the doubts lifted, Jessica realized that the true impact of their work would be seen not in the accolades or the headlines, but in the small, everyday moments of connection that were becoming more and more common in her community. Elon had once again found his balance. Luis had reminded him that the work they were doing wasn't about perfect outcomes. It was about being part of the long journey toward a more connected, compassionate world. And as they all moved forward, one thing was clear. The path of empathy wasn't always smooth, but it was a path worth walking together. As the years passed and the Empathy Challenge 2025 continued to spread, it became clear that Elon Musk, Jessica, Luis, and the countless others who had dedicated themselves to this cause were no longer just participants in a social experiment. They were now leaders in a global transformation, a transformation that was beginning to face some of its greatest challenges yet. It had been 3 years since Elon and his team first embraced empathy as a guiding principle for Tesla and SpaceX. The Empathy 360 movement had been embraced by millions of people worldwide, but as the movement grew, so did the pressure to maintain its integrity and impact. Elon sat in his private office at Tesla headquarters, staring at the numbers on his screen. He could feel the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. His team, his investors, his family, and now the entire world seemed to be watching every move he made. The global shift toward empathy and human-centered business practices was inspiring, but the path to long-term success was anything but easy. "We've built something amazing," Elon muttered to himself, staring at the progress charts and feedback coming in from all around the world. But can it last? Can we keep this up? He wasn't just talking about Tesla's financial success. He was talking about the emotional and societal transformation they had started. As more companies, governments, and schools implemented empathy-focused policies, there were rising concerns. Some people feared that the movement was growing too quickly, while others worried that the emotional toll of such widespread change might create burnout or even backlash. There were whispers in the media, from critics who called empathy-based business practices a fad, and from others who saw the new emotional economy as a threat to old ways of thinking. The pressure was mounting, and Elon felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. Was it really possible to change the course of history? Or was he chasing a dream that was too grand for even him? At the same time, across the country in Detroit, Jessica was facing her own set of challenges. The school district had seen some of the most transformational results from empathy-based education, but it wasn't without its critics. The success stories from her students, like Aiden, who had gone on to Columbia University, had been inspirational. However, there were dissenting voices within the school system who questioned whether these emotional-centered approaches were compromising academic rigor. One evening, after a particularly tough parent-teacher conference, Jessica stood in her classroom, looking out over the empty desks. The classroom had always been a place where she felt most at home, but tonight it felt different. Doubt had crept in. The pressure to prove that empathy-based teaching was more than just a trend weighed on her heart. Was she failing her students by focusing so much on emotional growth? Was she giving them the tools they needed to succeed in a world that still valued traditional metrics like grades and test scores? She pulled out her phone and read a message from Luis, who had just returned from a speaking engagement in Africa. The message was simple, but it resonated deeply. "Don't forget why you started this. You're changing lives, not just grades. Remember, empathy isn't just about making people feel better. It's about creating a world that works better for everyone." Jessica smiled at the message. It wasn't a quick fix to her doubts, but it was a reminder of the larger picture. She wasn't just teaching students math and reading. She was teaching them to see the world differently. She was helping them build a future that was grounded in understanding, compassion, and resilience. But still, the pressure was mounting. The cracks were beginning to show. Was the world ready for this level of emotional transformation? Would empathy prove to be the ultimate solution or just another idealistic dream? Meanwhile, Luis, who had become a world-renowned speaker on empathy and youth empowerment, was wrestling with a more personal challenge. As his visibility grew, so did the expectations placed upon him. He had been traveling extensively, sharing his journey, speaking at conferences, and meeting with young leaders in every corner of the globe. But it wasn't just the workload that weighed on him. It was the fact that the world's problems felt so immense, so overwhelming at times, that he wondered whether his own voice could make a difference. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day, Luis stood by his apartment window in New York, staring out at the skyline. He had just come from a community event where he had shared his story with a group of young people who had survived trauma and violence. They had listened intently, asking questions, offering their own stories. But as the evening wore on, Luis couldn't shake the feeling that his words, though well-meaning, felt empty in the face of such immense suffering. What's the point? He asked himself. Can empathy really heal all this pain? Or are we just playing at a solution? But then he thought about the conversation he had with Elon years ago, the one that had started it all. He had been homeless, struggling, uncertain of his future. But in that moment, the only thing that had kept him going was the belief that empathy could be a transformative force, that listening to people's stories could heal even the deepest scars. Luis reached for his phone and typed out a message to Elon. It's getting harder, man. I'm starting to wonder if we're really making a difference, or if we're just giving people false hope. What if we can't change the world after all? Elon received the message late that night, and for a moment, he felt a pang of recognition. He had been there himself, caught in the tension between hope and realism, unsure whether the movement he had started was enough to create lasting change. But then he thought back to what Luis had taught him. Empathy isn't about fixing everything. It's about showing up, one person at a time, and being there for the people who need it most. Elon typed back, "We're not here to fix everything, Luis. We're here to make it possible for people to fix themselves, one step at a time. That's the only way forward." The message was simple, but it was exactly what Luis needed to hear. The road ahead would never be easy. There would always be doubts, challenges, and backlash. But the movement was about more than just results. It was about progress, about continuing to show up and make a difference, no matter how small. As the Empathy Challenge 2025 entered its final year, it was clear that the world was still in the midst of a long, slow evolution. There were moments of doubt, yes, but there were also glimmers of hope, moments when the seeds of empathy began to bloom in the most unexpected places. And in those moments, Elon, Jessica, Luis, and countless others knew one thing for sure. This was a movement that couldn't be stopped, not by doubt, not by fear, and not by anything else. As Empathy Challenge 2025 came to its grand conclusion, the world found itself standing on the precipice of something transformative. The movement had not only spread across borders, but had taken on a life of its own, creating a new culture of connection, vulnerability, and shared humanity. People around the world were learning how to lead with their hearts, as much as with their minds, and the emotional economy that had once seemed like an idealistic dream was now a reality. Elon Musk, Jessica, Luis, and the many others who had led the charge had witnessed firsthand the immense power of empathy to reshape industries, communities, and even the most deeply entrenched societal systems. But as the final year of the challenge drew to a close, they all realized that their work was far from finished. It was in the quiet moments, the ones after the public celebrations and media blitzes, that they truly understood the significance of what they had created. The challenge was never just about numbers or accolades. It was about the quiet transformation happening in homes, classrooms, and boardrooms across the globe. Elon stood in front of a massive gathering of world leaders, CEOs, and activists at a global summit in Geneva. His voice, though calm, carried the weight of everything he had learned over the years. He had come to realize that while technology and innovation were powerful forces, it was empathy, the ability to understand and connect with others on a deeply emotional level that would define the future. When we set out on this journey, we weren't sure what to expect, Elon said, his eyes scanning the crowd. We knew that empathy was important, but we didn't realize just how much it could change the world. Today, we stand at the threshold of a new era, one where human connection is at the heart of everything we do. There was a hum of agreement throughout the room. The air was thick with anticipation. The people gathered were there not to hear Elon Musk's latest innovation or groundbreaking news, but to hear how empathy had become the force that now defined the future of work, the future of education, and the future of society. As Elon spoke, he thought back to the days when he had first met Luis, a homeless man struggling to survive on the streets of California. Now, Luis was standing next to him, a symbol of the power of second chances and the role that empathy had played in transforming not just his life, but the lives of countless others. Jessica, too, had witnessed firsthand the enormous impact of the Empathy 360 initiative on the education system. Detroit School District, once riddled with issues of disengagement, inequality, and miscommunication, had become a model for the nation. Teachers were no longer just delivering curriculum. They were building relationships with their students. They were teaching life skills that would serve their pupils far beyond the walls of the classroom. Jessica smiled as she stood in the Detroit School District headquarters, reflecting on the moment when she had first doubted whether emotional education could be integrated into a rigid academic system. She had now seen that empathy-driven education had the power to heal and create real change. At that moment, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Aiden, the same student who had sent her the heartfelt text years ago. Aiden had just graduated from Columbia University with a degree in social sciences, and he had just secured a job at a nonprofit organization that focused on emotional intelligence and conflict resolution. The text read, "Jessica, I just wanted to take a moment and thank you again for the foundation you gave me. What I learned in your classroom, empathy, resilience, understanding, has been the key to my success. I'm now working in a field where I get to help others find their voice, just like you did for me. Thank you for being part of my journey." Reading the message, Jessica felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. Aiden's success was proof that empathy in education wasn't just about feel-good lessons. It was about empowering young people to navigate the world with a sense of purpose and a deep connection to others. Meanwhile, Luis, who had once been homeless and lost, now found himself in a role he had never imagined, leading the charge in international youth development programs that focused on empathy-based leadership. In the years since the start of Empathy 360, Luis had traveled to more than 30 countries, meeting young leaders who were using empathy as a tool for peace-building, community development, and social change. On one of his trips, in a small village in Uganda, Luis met a young woman named Amina, whose community had been devastated by conflict. Amina had used the principles of empathy and emotional healing to bring together people from opposing sides of the conflict. Her efforts had resulted in a community-wide reconciliation that was nothing short of miraculous. During their conversation, Amina had told Luis something that stuck with him. Empathy doesn't just heal wounds, Luis. It prevents them in the first place. When we understand each other, when we truly listen to each other's stories, we prevent conflict before it even begins. Luis had to take a deep breath after hearing those words. In that moment, he realized that empathy wasn't just the answer to individual struggles. It was the key to global peace, sustainable development, and long-term societal transformation. As Empathy Challenge 2025 came to a close, Elon, Jessica, and Luis stood together at the summit, reflecting on what they had started years ago. They had not only changed their own lives, they had changed the course of history. But there was still so much more to be done. The movement wasn't over. It was just getting started. The world was now a very different place. Empathy had become a foundational pillar in business, education, politics, and social systems. People didn't just talk about empathy anymore. They lived it. They made decisions with compassion and sought understanding before judgment. Communities were more connected, more compassionate, and more resilient than ever before. And as Elon looked out over the sea of faces at the summit, each person eager to carry the message forward, he knew one thing for sure. The legacy of empathy had been built, not by the individuals who started it, but by the countless everyday people who had embraced the idea and made it their own. The movement would continue to evolve, but it would never lose its essence, the belief that, at the heart of every human interaction, there was a powerful force: empathy. Now that we've come to the end of this journey, what do you think the world would look like if empathy was at the core of everything we do? How can you contribute to this change in your own life? Let us know your thoughts.